I've experienced quite a bit throughout my life when it comes to the paranormal, and it all started at my old childhood house. It was a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom home in Garden Grove, California. If you were to drive by and look at this house, it's cute and it's a little home in a good environment. However, the things I've experienced sparked my interest and curiosity about the afterlife. Everything in every room in the house felt awkward whenever I walked into it. I shared the middle bedroom with my younger brother, who was only 4 at the time. Once a month, I would have a nightmare of a girl sitting on our picket fence with red eyes aglow, staring at me with such a playful expression. She didn't seem happy that our family was there. Nonetheless, us kids. The strange part about that was, whenever I would have these awful dreams, I would wake up to find my little brother crying, as if someone had really hurt him. I never really took the nightmare seriously though. We had an old, rusty swing set that we loved so much. I was only 10 at the time. During the daytime, everything would be fine, and no strange feelings would occur. However, once nighttime falls, our backyard would be off limits. My mom wouldn't let us go to the back and play on summer nights, and she, well, never told us why. One night, my mom forgot to turn off the water hose, so she kindly asked me if I would do it for her. The idea of it was already bothering me, but I didn't take anything paranormal into consideration. So, I went down, straight to the back of the house, and the walk there felt like eternity itself. I had a strong, eerie feeling that I was being watched and even followed. I bent down to turn off the hose and had a fear so strong that it made me tear up. I ran into the house and swore never to do the favor for my mother again. What made this incident particularly eerie was the fact that I swear I heard a sobbing. It was like in my mind, but I swear it was outside. In another awkward time, my mom was taking a shower, and I was in my room watching TV with my little brother. I heard her call my name, so I came to see what she wanted. She asked if I could go to the towel cabinet and grab her one. When I did, I walked up to the door in pure darkness, and I swear I saw a ghostly hand, but it was still a woman's hand with red fingernails. I immediately thought it was my mom's hand at first. The strange thing was, it was translucent. Like I said, a ghostly hand. But I mean, you could see right through this person's hand. So, naive as I was, I thought I said Mom, and instinctively handed her the towel. But the towel dropped to the ground, and the hand disappeared. My mom then opened the door and looked at me, saying, "Barbara, what are you doing, honey?" That's when I told her, "I was giving you the towel you wanted." My mom looked at me with such confusion and said, "You know I was in the kitchen, right?" When I look back at that incident, I know it terrifies me now, but at that moment, I was simply not afraid. I just chalked it up to something non-paranormal, and maybe my eyes were just playing tricks on me. But at that moment, it was pretty obvious that I was both hearing and seeing things come to life. Paranormal things at that. There was much more that went on in that house, such as, if you were sitting in the living room watching TV, at the corner of your eye, you will see a dark figure walking up to the front door. Immediately, you would assume someone was here, so you trot over to the door to find that no one is there. It happens almost every week to everyone in my family. I love that house, but I didn't love being followed or the feeling of being watched while taking a bath. After spending most of my childhood in that house, we moved to another city nearby. Now this house is quite dramatic. I'm 19 years old now, and I lived in Georgia for 3 years to finish up school. Coming back, strange activities started happening, especially in my new room. My grandfather passed away 3 years ago, and my room used to be his room. At night, getting home from my boyfriend's house, I would hear the floor creaking. I just assumed there was someone walking around, but to find that no one was out there at all. I remember one night, laying on my bed with the lights out and just the TV glaring. I fell asleep and woke up to see a pair of transparent, veiny legs pointing in my direction. I knew immediately who they belonged to. Grandpa. Grandpa was watching over me, and that didn't, and still doesn't scare me. But there's another presence in the house. A girl, I assume. I came one night from staying at my boyfriend's the previous night. I left the door opened because I was planning on changing and going to say hi to my parents. While changing, I have a habit of looking at the door to see if anyone will walk by and see me change. So, I looked a few times, and when I looked the last time, at the right side of my door, I swear I saw the apparition of a girl, her bright blue eyes, glowing and bulging right at me through the crack of the door. The eyes then disappeared. I trotted to the door, looked to my right, and nobody was there. Just then, it was my teenage cousin, Diane. But I looked towards the left side of the hallway, and there she was. I was absolutely freaked out in that moment. Well, those were some documented instances of my family's paranormal history. I hope for future sake that I never have to experience any of this again, even though the first few incidences weren't that scary, and even my grandpa incident, yeah, I wasn't scared. However, if it were any kind of other ghost, like the one I was just talking about, I might be a little bit more frightened. I'd like to refer to this haunting as the haunting in Duxbury, Vermont. We bought the house from the niece of Leo Morse in the fall of 1999. Leo lived here his entire life. Shortly after we moved in, we heard strange footsteps on the second floor when we knew no one was up there. During one such incident, my husband, myself, my 2 children, and a couple friends heard someone walking across the floor in the upstairs bedroom as we all stood in the living room below. One night, when I was taking a bath and was lying back in the tub with my eyes closed, I suddenly felt very uneasy, like someone was staring at me. I looked behind me to where the door was and saw this transparent mist, and it disappeared within a second. The door creaked open just an inch, and I screamed my head off. My son, while still in high school, had similar experiences of being watched by someone who couldn't be seen. Our television has also turned on by itself on more than one occasion. Our channels have changed, with the remote sitting out of everyone's reach. In the fall of 2007, my husband had just walked upstairs to go to our bedroom when I heard him hollering at someone and asking him what he wanted. We all ran upstairs to where my husband stood in the doorway to our bedroom. He was staring at the back wall of the other bedroom, pointing to no one and yelling, tears in his eyes, for someone who no one else could see to get out. This lasted for several minutes until the man, whom my husband said was in his early 30s, brown hair, clean shaven with round, wire frame glasses, dressed in a flannel shirt and blue jeans with the bottoms of the legs rolled into cuffs, disappeared. It was a very restless night that night, and my husband, who is not drunk or on drugs and isn't prone to hallucinations, doesn't like to talk about it much, but is very adamant that it truly happened. We haven't had any more sightings since then, but I still hear footsteps and unexplainable bangs and thumps coming from upstairs every morning after I get up, and I know my husband is still sound asleep in our room. My name is Andrea. I'm from New Mexico, and I'm 17. I've had numerous experiences throughout my life with the paranormal. I'll start from the beginning, I suppose. Before moving to Deming back in 2000, I lived in Hatch, which is about an hour away. We used to live in what was called the White Brick House, near the park, and not even a half mile from the schools. Hatch is very small. Anyway, living in the house was my mom, my very abusive dad, who I call Alex. I don't even call him dad. My 2-year-old sisters, and my older brother, and me, the youngest. I don't remember the experiences in any specific order, but I remember them as if they happened yesterday. They are all very true. Believe if you want. We had a certain room called the back bedroom that no one really liked to go to, at least not alone. This room had an extremely strong presence in it, and it was only when you entered it you could feel its presence. You could stand in the doorway and look in the bedroom and feel nothing, but as soon as you stepped, that all changed. You feel like you're being watched by one great evil spirit, or a great number of evil spirits. You would have to leave. It was so uncomfortable. We couldn't even get any of the dogs that we had throughout the time we lived there to enter that room. While there was that room, there was also other things that happened in the rest of the house. One night, my mom swears up and down this happened, and so does Alex. They were getting along. The rare occasion. I love these nights. My mom put all 4 of us to bed, so her and Alex had some alone time, and were relaxing together in the spa, talking one night. In the middle of their conversation, both my mom and Alex saw the shadow of someone walk past the doorway of the spa room. My mom thought it was one of us that had gotten up in the night and went to check in on us, only to find us all snoring in bed. Her and Alex then asked us the next morning if we had gotten up, and none of us had. Another time, me and my oldest sister were playing in what we called the second kitchen that had a room off called the craft room. My mom paints ornaments in there. We suddenly smelled a strong perfume that didn't smell like any perfume made today. Then we heard a conversation between maybe 4 or 5 people. We looked in and saw 5 older upper-class people in clothes from the early 1900s time. I remember one man specifically. He was bald, with a brown beard, and a looking-glass eyepiece like the rich people would wear back in the day. He was wearing a black penguin-tailed suit with a white button-up underneath. He looked somewhat pale, but not very transparent. He turned his head slowly and looked straight at me, not my sister, and nodded his head. Shortly after, he continued to speak with his company. I ran to my room and stayed there for the rest of the day. We had an organ in the living room, along with a drum set and Alex's guitars. We're all musicians. Amps would turn on, even when they were unplugged. The organ played as though a very experienced pianist were playing it. Piano was one thing none of us really learned how to play, so it was obvious none of us was playing it. There were times when the dogs would follow something we couldn't see down the hallway to my room and Alex's room. My older brothers one night got up to get a drink of water in the second kitchen, and that's where the laundry room also was. He's 22 years old now, and still swears this is true. He saw a tall figure standing by the washer and dryer near the back bedroom, and he felt it as an evil being. It just stood there, glaring at him, but never moved, as if it was frozen, but with the evil expression looking at him wherever he moved. He figured it was Alex. He shouted out Alex's name, but didn't hear a response, so he figured he was mad and went back to bed. The next morning he asked Alex why he was so mad at him. Alex just looked at him and said he was at the bar. My other sister said she was walking by the back bedroom one night and swore she saw a black figure out of the corner of her eye, standing straight up against the wall, and it tried to grab her with its arms, but couldn't reach, as if it was restrained. After Alex left, we moved out of the house and into a little apartment. There's only been one thing that has ever happened to me there. I got up in the middle of the night to get something to drink, and as I was going back to my room, I saw what looked like a little blue orb, glowing in intense blue. It moved around for a few minutes, before ultimately dissipating into thin air. Aside from these apartments we lived in, we also moved into a trailer not too far from the white brick house. This house was always said to be haunted because the man who used to live there died of a heart attack in either the yard or the bathtub, and he had 2 dogs that died of mysterious causes after he did. It was almost as if they died of a broken heart. There would be nights when we could hear the clicking sounds of a dog's nail on the tiles. I was in my room reading one night when my whole dresser just fell over. No reason for it just to fall over. My friend and I, Rosario, and my sister were all in the living room one night when we heard a window shatter come from my room. We never found a single shard of broken glass in the house or even outside, even though the sound came from inside. Finally, I would always see the shadow of someone walk into the laundry room, and no one would be there when I looked. All of these incidents were fairly alarming to all of us, and I'm convinced that they were being followed by the same evil spirit that resided in the red brick house. These days, I never experienced any hauntings, and I'm very glad that this is all over. In the fall of 2001, my parents bought an old Victorian house in a quiet suburb. It was a huge relief for us because that year was a very tumultuous time for our family. We couldn't find a house that was affordable, and nearly every house we found in the area was either in need of major repairs or super expensive. When we moved into this home, there had been mumblings around town that nobody wanted it due to its supposed hauntings. By the way, I'm 21. The house had a history of violence and death. The city is very safe now, but years ago, it was considered one of the worst cities to live in. It was said that a man who had lived his entire life as a loner took up residence in the house in the early 1920s. One night, he apparently hired a prostitute to stay the night with him. She was unaware that he had no money to pay her for her services. He led her into the kitchen, playing off that he had some spare cash lying around the house. He ultimately ended up strangling her to death and chopping up her body. He was apprehended months later and ended up dying in prison. When the cops questioned him, all he could say was that he needed love. In the first months, we had stereotypical noises that any house would make and dismissed it as nothing more than just noises. However, doors would open and close, lights would flicker on and off, and there was this funky odor that always seemed to linger throughout the house. It was very hard to describe, but it smelled a lot like rotten eggs on a very subtle level. The most terrifying thing that occurred was when I was in the kitchen in the middle of the night. It was about 11 p.m., and I had just come home from work and entered the front hallway of the house at first. That's when I heard whispers, which sounded like the word lonely. I figured I was just exhausted from a long day's labor, so I decided I needed to get to bed. But before I did, I fixed myself something to eat in the kitchen. I walked into the kitchen, but that's when I heard moaning sounds, almost like someone was struggling. As I sat on the chair by the kitchen table, I saw the transparent figure of a woman with an anguished look on her face. She appeared for a few moments, then disappeared. She looked like she was from another era and wore all black. Her face looked disfigured and beaten. It terrified the living hell out of me, so I ran upstairs to get my parents. I guess I just needed some comforting, and I found out they weren't home yet. There were other incidents that occurred in the house. My mom actually told me that she was in the laundry room when she could distinctly hear the sounds of a growling man in the laundry room late at night. This was something that seemed to happen quite frequently around the same time, and always only in the laundry room, nowhere else. It was never something really loud and startling. It was always faint, but insanely scary. There were times that we would see two shadows in the corner of our eyes constantly walk back and forth from the kitchen to the living room. Again, this was subtle. When anybody would actually turn to directly look, these shadows would be gone. Most of the time, we always thought it was just our eyes playing tricks on us, and even after my incident, I still thought that. Anyway, that's my story. It might not be too exciting compared to others, but it is creepy and insane. I'm glad I don't live in that house anymore. Sadly, my parents still do, but it seemed that nothing happens anymore, besides the subtle doors creaking open slowly from time to time, and the continuation of lights flickering. Thanks for reading. I feel kinda silly writing this, since I haven't talked much about it since it happened. I'm 17 now, and still can't come up with any explanation other than spirits. I've always been a believer, and hoped to one day have my own encounter with ghosts. I never thought it would be as terrifying as it was. 8 years ago, summer of 2000, my dad's family was having a reunion, and we all decided we would stay at Oak Island Beach in North Carolina. I'm not sure if that is the exact name. I know it was something to do with oak in it. The week we were there, the weather was very fickle. It rained most days, and the sun was only out 3 or 4 times. Most of our time was spent indoors. My parents, sister, and grandparents shared one condo. My dad's brother and sister and her family shared another, and his step-siblings were in the third with their children. One night, while it was storming, my cousin Josh and I went to the condo to play video games and watch TV. Everyone else was in our condo, playing cards and drinking. We played Dino Crisis and an X-Men game, and decided to watch cartoons after about an hour. We spent another couple of hours just goofing off, when the storm really started picking up. We were sitting on the couch, talking and laughing, when we heard a creak on the balcony outside. Neither of us is scared easily now, and we weren't then either. I looked out of the sliding doors, but everything was pitch black. We went back to our conversation and had no interruptions for a couple of minutes. When a bolt of lighting lit up the beach, we saw a man standing on the balcony, dressed in a trench coat. He seemed to be looking out at the sea. It all happened so suddenly. We didn't believe what we saw, no matter how skeptical we were. We weren't about to go and check like I had with the noise. After a couple of minutes, we noticed the door was fogging up. Not the entire thing, just a little patch about 6 feet off of the floor. We were very spooked now. During the next bolt of lightning, we both saw the man standing against the door, looking in on us. He screamed, and I screamed, and we jumped over the couch, headed for the door. We yanked it open, and as we did, we heard the sound of glass breaking. We didn't look back, just ran across the parking lot to the other condo. When we came in, we were soaked and out of breath. Our parents started to freak, asking us what was wrong. When I told them, they just laughed and brushed it off. We kept begging them to call someone, but they refused. After about a minute, they got fed up with it. They grabbed us and their umbrellas and dragged us over there. When we went in, the place was just as we left it. The door was intact, and no one was on the balcony, not even a footprint. I know I didn't imagine it. I believe that the spirit was drawn to me for some reason. My cousin has had no other experiences that he has told me about, and I've had quite a few, but none as intense as the first. Anyone that has had a similar experience, know that you're not alone. Finding the site has opened my eyes to the world of ghosts and those that have been affected by them. Thanks. My Aunt Terry, from my father's side, lived in Oklahoma. When I was about 16, she came here to Memphis, and she told me about a house that she lived in. She said that when her husbands and kids moved in, there was a barn out back, and she said when she walked in there was an upside-down pentacle on the barn floor. After she saw that, she never went back out there. One night, when everyone went to bed, my Aunt Terry heard the dogs barking in the kitchen. She went into the kitchen and watched her dog bark at a corner in the room. The next night she went to bed, and the TV in the living room came on by itself, and she said it did it every night. So one night, she decided to unplug the TV, and she went to bed as normal, and the TV still came on. Then another day, after everyone ate dinner, they were all sitting in the living room. My aunt looked out the window and saw a pair of red eyes. Her husband saw them too, and it really freaked them out. On yet another night, my aunt and uncle and the kids were leaving to go see a movie, and on the porch stood a beast with red eyes, and half his body was human, but the rest of him was like an animal. She described his hands and feet as hoofs. Well, after they got home that night, my aunt and uncle made the kids sleep with them, and Catherine started to get really sick. When my aunt and uncle tried to take her to the hospital, the car wouldn't start, so they had to push the car all the way down the street, and it started right up. The doctors couldn't find out what was wrong with Catherine. My aunt and uncle decided to move, and every morning the car wouldn't start when my aunt had to go to work, until my uncle pushed it down the street. After my aunt and uncle found a new place to live, when they got everything they owned out of the house, Catherine got better immediately, and the car never gave them a problem, and the TV never came on by itself again. Some strange occurrences, but I swear they're true. Thanks for reading. The Hampton Inn on Warner Road, off Route 279, has a haunted room, which is number 417. My husband stayed in this room while on a business trip in March 2008. He frequently stays at this hotel while in Maryland, but never had an experience like this until he stayed in room 417. This was his room for 3 nights, and for the first 2 nights, he was very restless and didn't sleep well, which was not a normal occurrence for him. On the 3rd restless night, he realized that he was hearing noises inside the room, not from adjoining rooms. These noises were hangers moving around in the closet, the refrigerator door opening, noises from the bathroom, and the sound of glass being set on the nightstand next to the bed. Final thing that really spooked him was that something grabbed his side as he laid on the bed, trying to ignore the sounds and fall asleep. He was not imagining any of this. He could still feel the sensation of his side after jumping out of bed. He looked around the room and checked the deadbolt lock on the door, and all was secure. He considered packing and checking out, but it was 3 a.m. He finally fell asleep and checked out the next morning. He has since stayed at the hotel and was offered the same room upon check-in, but he refused it. The hotel clerk wanted to know why, but he didn't want to sound foolish and wouldn't elaborate on his experience. For the record, he didn't believe in ghosts or spirits until this happened. We believe that someone must have died in this room, heart attack or something, and their spirit is trapped there. We dare anyone to stay in this room. It is creepy. Last year, I was living in an apartment on the far northwest side of town in Chicago, Illinois, and had one experience in an apartment that for the most part was pretty quiet, but for this experience. I lived in a frighteningly active apartment on the northeast side before this occurrence, so this didn't really totally freak me out, but I was sitting in my living room on the couch reading. The sun was reflecting through the blinds, which I halfway closed, and the TV, which was directly in front of me and perhaps 8 to 10 feet away, was off. I sat reading for quite some time, and at one point looked up and into my reflection on the TV screen. Sitting a few inches from me was a woman with a pageboy hairdo, perhaps in her early 40s, with glasses on. I could see her curves as she sat, so there was no mistake that she was a woman. I turned instantly to my left side, irrationally expecting to see someone sitting next to me in my lockdown apartment where I knew no one but myself had been the entire day. No one was there, of course. I looked back into the TV reflection again, and she was no longer there. May I point out that there was absolutely nothing in that apartment that could have made such a reflection. I was on the second story, so there was nothing inside that could have reflected that way, no nearby trees, etc. It was a bona fide experience. There was this one terrifying experience, though, that has haunted me ever since while being in that apartment. I was sitting in the bathroom, doing my business, as usual. I left the door open because I felt very uncomfortable with the door closed. I don't know why, it just gave me that feeling. I saw that same lady, early 40s style, with the pageboy hairdo, right outside the door. It was like she was fixated on me, and she appeared momentarily, just staring at me. Although the bathroom light was obviously on, the hallway outside the door was pretty dim, so you could just barely make out the outline of her face and her body. There were some slight changes with her this time. The only difference being this time was that she looked like she was in some kind of nun outfit. It was really creepy. This was the moment where I was terrified. I didn't know what to think. She kind of looked like Mother Teresa in a way. It also looked like she was trying to open her mouth, but somehow couldn't. Like she was unable to speak or something. Maybe she was in danger. Just like that, she disappeared. And later on in that day, I also saw an orb float around. It was pretty eerie. For the record, this was a highly Polish neighborhood, and had been for years, so I have a feeling it was some old Polish lady that couldn't leave her building. I lived there for a year, and am now gone. I also have a theory that because she is Polish, that she was wearing the nun attire due to her religion. You see, Polish people are Roman Catholics usually, so it all made sense to me at the time when I thought about it. Thanks for reading. I had a personal experience at this bed and breakfast, and it was so exciting. A friend of mine and I were staying in this B&B, the Henderson House, while we visited her daughter at a nearby Baptist university where she is a cheerleader. We stayed in the downstairs guest bedroom by the dining room. When we arrived, they were setting up for a big sit-down dinner and reception with round tables covered in white tablecloths. It was a big affair that went on for a while we were at a football game. When we arrived back at the B&B later that night, it was late, and the staff was cleaning up and putting up the tables. They apologized for making so much noise, and said that they'd be finishing up for the next hour or so, washing the tablecloths and putting them away. We were exhausted, so we each took a shower, and my friend crawled into this beautiful mahogany bed, and I pulled out the sleeper sofa and settled in and watched TV for a little while. Finally, it quieted down somewhat out in the parlor, so we turned off the lights and immediately fell asleep. I woke up some time earlier as 3 women in gowns brushed by my bed, carrying things. We had gotten quite friendly with the innkeeper and her staff earlier, so I really didn't think that much about it, and wondered why they had put things away in our room before morning. The next morning, I asked my friend what the women were doing in our room the night before. She said, "What women? No one came in here," and she motioned towards the door where the deadbolt was still locked. She went out to the dining room for breakfast a little before I did, and as I was walking out into the hall, she walked up to me and said, "Come here, the owner has something to tell you." When I walked into the kitchen, the owner looked up and said, "So, you saw them, huh?" I told her I saw 3 women in gowns, and she said, "They are dressed in wedding and bridesmaid dresses." She then walked into the parlor and opened the big old photo album and turned to the page that showed a wedding party lined up on the staircase. It was them. They are seen from time to time getting ready for a ceremony, and the bedroom where we stayed at was once a porch that leads around to the front of the house. Because it is a Baptist college, they don't promote these ghost stories, as the college frowns on it. But she said many people see them. There is also a ghost of a captain, Army or Sea, I didn't quite get, but he haunts an upstairs room with a big bay window and is seen often too. It was not a frightening thing. I loved it, in fact, and hoped to go back again. They were not see-through people, and had I reached out, I could have touched their dresses. Maybe. In the year 2000, my husband and I moved to Lagrange, Georgia, to a fairly new apartment on Old Airport Road. His job had transferred him from New Hampshire, and he was able to be on a 5-day shift, 5 on and 5 off. That meant he would not be home every other week, as he was a truck driver for a major store chain. Anyway, after being there a month or so, we decided that it was a great little town to settle down in, and began looking for a house. During this time, we had no incidents at the apartment. After another 2 months of searching, we finally found the house we wanted. It was a 3-bedroom ranch with a small in-ground pool located in a rural part of Lagrange. When our offer was accepted, we were ecstatic. This is when my 4-year-old son began falling out of bed at night, something he had neither done before or after living at this apartment. Eventually, this led him to waking up in the middle of the night, and I would have to go in and confront him, which was usually fairly easy to do, and he'd go back to sleep, only to wake up later again in the night. When I put them to bed, I would sit in the hallway between both of their doors. Daughter's bedroom was at the end of the hall, which was about 10 feet long, but their doors were close together. I would have all the lights off, except the hallway, and once they were asleep, I'd go and get on the PC in the dining room, adjacent to their hallway. This hallway had a bathroom at the opposite end of the bedrooms, and a laundry closet, where my washing machine were. One night, my son insisted I lay with him in bed, so I laid down behind him, closest to his closet, with him closest to the door. My eyes were closed, and we were both resting quietly, when suddenly he half sat up in bed and said, "Who is that?" Naturally, I asked, "What do you mean?" He said a woman in a long skirt just walked by his bedroom door and headed to his sister's room. Of course, this is the week my husband's gone, so I'm alone in the apartment, thinking someone must have broken into our second-floor apartment. So I got up and looked. My daughter, who is 9 years old, thankfully was sound asleep, so I checked her room, closet, and under her bed to make sure no one was in there. I questioned my son again, and he said no one passed back by his door, and there's no exit from my daughter's room, just right by my son's room. I brought both kids to sleep in my bed on the other side of the apartment that night. Another night, I sat in the hall again until they were both asleep. Now keep in mind, all the lights are off except the hall, which includes their big walk-in closets. No lights on. When they were both sleeping, I got up and used their bathroom at the end of their hall. While in there, I heard what sounded like a toy hitting the wall of my son's closet, which shared a wall with the bathroom. Thinking that he woke up and started playing, which was not like him at all, by the way, I went to his room to find him sleeping cozily, but the closet door halfway open and the light inside open. Okay, so now I'm freaked out because I know that the door was closed and the light was off, and yes, his bed's right next to that closet, so yeah, I took them into my room again. Again, on another night, my son wakes up again, but this time my husband's home and we're all asleep in our own beds. I can hear my son crying, so I go to comfort him, but he's not there. My husband and I can't find him, but he's still crying, sobbing, a terrified cry actually. In a minute or two, we find him hiding under the sink in the bathroom at the end of his hallway. He told us the mean lady won't let him pass. He had tried to come in her room, but she stood in front of him. Again, he described her exactly the same. Long skirt, hair up behind her head, and she makes faces at him. Now I know for a fact I'm dealing with a ghostie here, but husband thinks I'm just going nuts and putting stories in the kid's head. My daughter, meanwhile, never notices any of this and is not disturbed. While on the computer one night, late around 2 a.m., I hear 3 distinct loud knocks under my feet. One on the left in the small kitchen, one directly below my feet, and one to my right. Sounded like someone downstairs used a broom to knock on the ceiling in extremely rapid succession. I sincerely doubt that anyone can move as quickly in the downstairs apartment and get by the furniture they undoubtedly had there, just as I had mine arranged. I know for a fact the lady and her kids were in bed by 10 at night. So the bank has decided that they will give us a loan on any house in Lagrange, except that one, because it's rural, so we try another place and another. One night, I'm sleeping, and have a more vivid than any other dream I've ever had. Kind of like a dream nightmare. In it, we live in the house, and I'm looking for my son, only to find him floating face down in the pool. I woke up crying, and made up my mind that there's no way I'm ever moving into the house. So now I must convince hubby, who thinks I'm nuts anyway, and is determined to get to that house. Well, having bought a puppy when we started looking for a house, this collie is now almost fully grown size, but he still has accidents, so we keep him penned in the kitchen with a large baby gate. When we go out, this doggy somehow gets past the gate by pushing a corner or whatever, and is running around our apartment. So one night, we're going out to dinner, and hubby and I lock up Poochie and set 2 high back dining chairs against the gate. Keep in mind, our apartment is carpet, thick and plush everywhere, except the kitchen. When we return, Puppy is looking at me from my kid's hallway, and the gate is still exactly as we left it, and the chairs are too. Not one thing had moved, But somehow, according to Lovey Hubby, I'm supposed to believe the dog vaulted over the chair backs and somehow landed without killing himself or breaking my dining room table, which was a mere foot or two from the chairs. Yeah, okay. My downstairs neighbor's kids told me that their mom was upset because I let my kids run around my apartment, banging at all hours of the night, mostly after 10 p.m., and she can't believe I let my kids stay up so late. She has to get up early, yada yada yada. Except, my kids are in bed every night at 9 o'clock and asleep no later than 9:30ish. I see a shape leaning out of the kitchen door, watching me as I watch TV and tell it, "Come sit by me and leave my son alone." It didn't sit with me, but it didn't bother my son that night. I never noticed my dog noticing anything. The only cold spot in the house was the kids' hallway, and not always, just mostly. Hubby slept in son's room one day, in the afternoon, and, even though we had central air, complained that he sweat like a hog, and had the worst nightmares ever. But the place still isn't haunted, and yes, he steadfastly refused to ever sleep in there again. I saw blinds move on their own, doorknobs that rattle when I was alone in the place, and no, it wasn't a teeny shake caused by some truck rumbling by, which was there some 50 to 100 feet between the side of our apartment and the road. This was a defined and voracious shaking, a definitive hello, I'm trying to open the door. But no one in the apartment but me. Finally, my husband grew tired of trying to get a loan for that house, and mysteriously, everything stopped. No more rattling of this or that, no shadows, but by now, it is also true that the four of us were sleeping in my waterbed, in the one room that never seemed affected by the haunting. But I noticed everything in the apartment changed and felt cozy again. But by then, I'd also decided that tornadoes, large cockroachy looking bugs, and the ghost belt were too much for me, and we packed up and came back north. Interestingly enough, when we returned home to my parents' house, which we later bought, which has never ever felt anything but perfect there were 3 knocks on the bottom half of my bedroom door one afternoon. I was alone in the house. Immediately, I felt that was the spirit or something, telling us we made the right choice by not getting the house. My father believed that it was his mother who had lived and died in North Carolina, who knew something bad would happen to my son if we bought that house, especially since it all seemed to stop when we stopped trying to get financing for it and gave up on the house. My son has never been affected by any other ghosty type stuff since then, and he's never fell out of bed again either. Feel free to email me if you choose. Earlier this year, I attended a camp in Reuben County, Georgia. There, I was told the story of Timothy Dalton. The story is that, in the late 1970s, the Daltons lived in a rural area of Harbison County, Georgia. Supposedly, Timothy was about 11 years old, an only child, and his parents didn't really like him. They abused him in every way possible, and kept him in the basement, due to them not thinking it was worthy of a room upstairs. This wasn't even really a basement, more just like a cellar, with one small window that was about 2 feet in length and a half foot up. Mr. Dalton's wood workshop was down there, so at night, Timothy would work on whatever he could. His father didn't mind him working with his wood, because his father would take whatever Timothy made and sell it without giving Timothy any of the money. Well, one day, Timothy was at home, alone weeding the field, when the postman came. His parents had got off into the next city over to get some supplies for the upcoming fall. Now, Timothy knew that there was such a thing as mail, but since his parents didn't tell him where it came from and neglected to send him to school, he never knew what it honestly looked like. The postman approached Timothy and asked him if his father was around. When Timothy answered no, the postman handed over a package. He had never seen a package before and was informed not to open it or even shake it. It was his father's and not his. Timothy went inside the house and set the package down on the kitchen table. He couldn't stop thinking about it, so he opened it and made sure that he could seal it again. Around this time, power tools started to come out, and Timothy's father figured that he should have one since he does work on wood sometimes. Timothy saw that it was a power drill and was in awe. He couldn't wait until that night to start making something. So, for the rest of the day, he just went around and collected logs and sticks so that he could make something. Once he found them, he set them by the window and at night would open it and pull them in. That night, once his parents locked him in the basement, he started to work. He worked and worked for about 3 hours until he came up with this beautiful rocking chair. He had never seen something this beautiful and never been this happy about something like this. So every night, throughout the summer and the fall, he would sit and rock in it until he would fall asleep. Well, a horrible blizzard blew through, and it was a horrible sight. All the crops of the city had died, and nothing was left of them. So one day, Mr. Dalton told Timothy to go and find firewood for the fireplace, since they didn't have electric heating. Timothy knew that all the firewood would be wet, but decided not to fight with his father. After about 2 hours, Timothy had found some dry pieces to possibly hold them over for the night, so he turned back and started to walk back towards the house. As he approached the end of the woods, he noticed that there was a smoke coming out of the fireplace. He found this very odd and didn't quite know why his father would send him out to find firewood if he already had some. So Timothy walked into the house, and as soon as he walked in, he was horrified. He saw his rocking chair, the only thing he had ever been proud of, chopped up in the fireplace, burning to little bits. Timothy snapped, that's all to say. He didn't start to yell at his dad or anything. He just mentally snapped. So he sat down the firewood and did his chores. Before he was locked down in the basement, he managed to sneak some chicken wire under his shirt, so he took it down to the basement and was locked in there. After about an hour, he knew that his mom and dad had just turned off the light to go to bed. After maybe 3 hours, he had constructed this power drill into this killing machine. He had found an X-Acto knife and bound it to the power drill so that when he turned the trigger on it, it would spin around and around. So he used some chicken wire to unlock himself and walked up the stairs to his parents' room. He slowly bound his parents' hands and feet to the bedpost and footboard. It took him about an hour just to do this without either of them stirring. So, once that was done, he just stood over his father, staring him dead in the eye with his hand and power drill behind his back. As soon as his father awoke, he started yelling at Timothy, calling him a freak, and wondering what he was doing there. So, Timothy didn't do anything, just pulled out the power drill and jammed it straight into his father's heart and turned it on. His mother was screaming bloody murder, so he pulled it out of his father and slowly walked around the other side to his mom. She was crying and was in absolute hysterics. Timmy looked over at her, then revved the power drill once and shoved it straight into her neck. He just dropped everything, didn't wash his hands, didn't even try to clean up. He didn't care if he was caught. All he cared about was that rocking chair. So he went over to the fireplace and sat down in front of it and stared into it for 3 days until the police got suspicious and noticed that they hadn't seen them for a while. When they came to the house, they didn't even have to ask any questions. They knew what happened. So they admitted Timothy into the psych ward, where he stayed until the late 90s. Now that you know the story, I can get to my experience. It's important to understand that story so you can understand the experience that happened to me. When I was with my camp, our cabin of 20 boys and girls were on a bus headed to Helen to go tubing on the Hooch. It was really rainy, so they didn't want us going in the water, so they took us to go bowling in the Apparition County. The night before, we had hiked up Blood Mountain and was told that story, so we were all pretty freaked out. Well, me and my friend Kelly and her boyfriend Jake decided to go walk around the bowling building, since a lot of the counselors were already back there. So as we're walking back there was an old man with slightly grayish hair standing out there and smoking. We had been informed that if you see anyone outside your camp, that you kindly say hello, don't say your name, and only tell where you're from, camp-wise. The man did what any other person would do and ask us our names. We sat down on a curb that was parallel to him, but the length of a car away from him. We told him that we were from CHH Lake Burton, and that we were here with a camp. Well, that still doesn't answer my question, he said. Kelly spoke up. I'm sorry, sir, but we're not allowed to tell you our names. He looked at her and laughed a little. Well, Kelly, my name is Tim. We're all completely shocked and confused. How do you know our names? I asked. He laughed again and put out his cigarette. Let's just say that I know a lot of things. Harbison is a very quiet town, and as of last night, for you guys, it was a very innocent town too. We were all in shock and awe. How did he know that he knew about the murders? We all got spooked, and Jack led the way back around the building. But every crazy person has some parting words. Just remember this, he said to us as we all halted to stop. I wouldn't have had to kill him if he just kept his eyes closed. To this day, it still haunts me. The wheezing laugh of that man, and the wondering of the story. Is it honestly true? A few weeks ago, my grandparents and I went to a Mormon pioneer cemetery a few miles from where I live to get a picture of an ancestor's gravestone. While driving into the cemetery, I noticed a particularly tall gravestone. As soon as I saw it, I got the chills. Normally, I'm not scared of cemeteries or things like that, at least not in the daytime. As we left the cemetery, my grandmother pointed out the creepy headstone. She said it was her grandaunt's grave, and that this lady had crossed the plains to come to Utah when she was about 8. She later went north to help settle in the town of Richmond, Utah. Then Grandma told me the following story. When my Aunt Andrea was about 15, she was home alone in the kitchen right after school. She heard a woman's voice and turned around. She saw an elderly lady in a long, old-fashioned style dress with her hair in a bun. Andrea ran out of the house and to a neighbor's, where she called my grandmother at work. Grandma thought she was trying to get attention, but told her she could stay with the neighbors until she got home from work. The same thing happened twice over the next 2 weeks. My grandma requested a picture of my great aunt from my great grandmother so she could copy it and hang it up on the mantle. It was lying on the counter the next day when Andrea came home. As soon as she saw the picture, she jumped. She asked Grandma who it was, then told her it was the ghost. Andrea never saw the woman again, but says it wasn't scary, more like a lady that wanted to help. I know this one's kinda short, but thanks for reading. I have a story to tell you of a sight which will always be engraved into my mind for life. A friend of mine and I were avid hunters, and we were returning from a duck hunting trip in a place called Duxbury. We were trying to remain as quiet as possible so that we could catch and hunt as many of those ducks as possible. As time wore on, we weren't able to find too many, but still decided to have a look by the river to check for those elusive ducks. Before we crossed the fields back to the house, we made our way across the M1 motorway at Duxbury and had our guns loaded as well. It was then when my heart thunderously stopped and noticed something far more terrifying than a simple duck. I put my last shell up the spout and noticed a tall, light tan colored figure to the right of me. It seemed to be about 7 feet tall and off of the ground by about 2 feet, and scared the crap out of me. I couldn't speak, and I warned my friend to stay away. At the time, my friend was right behind me when I saw the figure, but didn't quite understand what I was so terrified about, since he didn't see it himself. I told him to start running, and running as fast as possible, so we could be as far from this mysterious figure. My first instinct was to point my gun at it, but I urged my friend to stay away from this thing. I thought by pointing at it with my gun, I would scare the figure away. Of course now, looking back, it was a ghost, so it sounds silly now. We eventually made it out of there without incident, and explained to my friend what I saw. He called me crazy, he called me insane, but I swore to him that is exactly what I saw. A 7-foot figure floating directly at me from the distance. This happened about 14 years ago, and neither of us went hunting at night again. I told a friend of mine this story, and he explained that a figure not unlike a monk had been reported on the motorway from as far back as 30 years ago. Wish someone could have told me, then I wouldn't be as spooked. My grandparents used to own a home in New Hartford, Connecticut, until about 5 years ago. It was a huge house, mostly built by my gramps, and it sat centered on about 4.5 acres of land. It was really nice, in the daytime, anyhow. It was a 2-story house with a huge attic and a basement as well. There were a total of 5 bedrooms in the main part of the house, and there was a 2-bedroom apartment connected to the house. Now, just as a bit of a background, my gram and gramps were some really cool old people. They traveled a lot. In fact, they've been to many different countries. They have been to all 48 continental states, plus Alaska, in their RV. A few years before I was born, they went to Haiti, and they bought this freaky little wooden statue. Ever since I was a little girl, anytime we went up to Connecticut to visit them, I hated that statue. A giant pillowcase used to have to be put over it so that I couldn't see it. One night, when I was about 13, I was sleeping in the bedroom that was converted into my gram's needlepoint and sewing room. I woke up to go to the potty. A little freaky statue man had the customary pillowcase pulled over him and was standing in his usual corner across the short, squared hall from my room. I went potty and came out. First thing I always did was I had to check and make sure that the little man hadn't moved. I ended up wetting myself when I looked and saw the pillowcase on the floor in the corner where scary statue man was, and then looked at the corner by my door, and he was there. I was only in the bathroom for 2 minutes, and that statue was way too heavy for anyone to move it, and me to not hear it. Everyone else was asleep anyhow. My older brother, the one who would have been sick enough to pull a mean prank like that, was not at my grandparents' home. He was in Bark Homestead with my cousin Sean and my Aunt Joni and Uncle Jim's house. As soon as I saw that Mr. Man was waiting for me by my door, probably waiting for me to walk by so that he could grab me and eat me or something. I immediately took off running down the stairs, which was an incredible feat for me in and of itself, if you've never seen a fat 13-year-old girl run before, and run through the family and living room, through the kitchen, into the foyer, and up 2 steps to the attached apartment where my mother was sleeping with my little sister Hannah and my baby brother Ryan. The next morning, bright and early, we went upstairs to investigate, and where was the statue? Back in the corner it was supposed to be in, with the pillowcase pulled over it. I've had many encounters with the paranormal since I was about 5 or 6 years old, and I've seen ghosts, and I've even heard and seen the presence of demons. I wanted to share 2 of these experiences with you. People can think what they will, but I take these things very seriously, and know beyond a shadow of a doubt that they are real and walk among us. First ghost to ever cross my path was that of a woman. I was 5 at the time and had gone to the kitchen to get a drink while my family was watching a movie on the hydro bed. I was standing there, drinking my water, when I see in my peripheral vision a woman in a white dress floating down the hall from my aunt's room right into the room occupied by my mother and myself. Being as I was a child, a thought only that this lady didn't belong in our house surfaced in my mind. Well, for some reason, I decided to throw a kitchen knife at it, and you guessed it, the knife went through it. I always believed that she was hiding in my closet as well. There would be numerous instances where I'd be sleeping in my room in the middle of the night. That's when I would hear the closet door and see it open a crack. It was very terrifying, and I didn't know what to do but to stare in absolute terror. There were more than a few instances where it felt like something was trapped inside there and was trying to claw its way out. So much so, in fact, that actually the door was splintered in a few places. My second encounter was with a phantom miner. Sounds weird, huh? But let me just say that this was in Sacramento, California, where gold was discovered. Sutter's Mill was about 10 to 15 miles from our house. I saw the specter in our backyard, digging in the ground. He was dressed as a miner, would have dressed in the 1840s. He even had a mule with him, loaded down with things. It was at about 10 p.m. at night. I guess he found what he was looking for, because he pulled something out of the ground, put it in a pack, grabbed the mule's reins, and started to walk away. About 3 seconds later, he had vanished from sight. The thing that was odd to me was that a water pipe that was in the spot where the phantasmal miner was searching at, that very next morning, mysteriously began to leak. Strange series of events, but I'm glad you were able to read them, and I appreciate your readership. Since I was a little girl, my sisters and I had frightening experiences with ghosts. When I was 6, my family and I moved to a fairly new house, only 8 years old at the time, in West Texas. As far back as I can remember, we had strange things going on in that house. First off, at night, if you were to go through the hallway to get to my parents' room, you would always hear what sounded like a TV. You could hear voices and sometimes music. Most of the time, my parents' TV was off. If you left the room and stood in the hallway again, the sounds would be gone. Secondly, when I would try to go to sleep at night, I would always have that classic someone's watching me feeling. I always blamed it on me, being a young child. The house was a very scary place to be at night. Wherever you went, someone was watching you. Friends who have spent the night rarely stayed twice. The areas of the house that scared everyone the worst were the hallways to my parents' room and my older sister's closet. The closet always had a feeling of hate radiating from it. I tried to spend a night in there with my scared sister, and didn't last. I was sleeping on the floor with my head next to the closet, and that just wasn't a good feeling. I went back to my room after she fell asleep. A couple years after we moved in, my younger sister had a frightening experience. Her and I shared a bedroom with our beds parallel to each other, with a nightstand in between us. We were about 3 feet apart. One night, I woke up to her screaming my name. I woke up and asked what was wrong. She told me that, for no reason at all, she woke up and looked over at my bed. Laying at the foot of my bed, she saw a light blue, glowing figure of a woman. Her eyes were gone, and her mouth hung open. My sister described her as looking dead. My sister also added that she couldn't see me anywhere on the bed, so she started screaming my name and closed her eyes. When she opened them, I was awake, asking her what was wrong. She told me, and I looked down at the foot of my bed, and my huge stuffed animal that I had there every night was sparking like it had really bad static electricity. I took it off my bed and threw it in my bathroom sink and ran water over it. Being young, I thought it would help. Years later, my family and I moved to southern Louisiana and moved into a gated subdivision. One night my 2 sisters were mad at me and left the house to go on a walk. I followed them without them knowing. I followed them up to the front gate of the subdivision and talked to them for a minute. They quickly left in a huff, being that they were still angry with me. For what? I don't remember now. I stayed by the gate for a couple of minutes afterwards, and then decided to run to the end of the main street and hide behind some bushes that faced the gate. I waited for my sisters to walk by, and when they did, unaware of where I was hiding, they stopped remotely in front of the bushes. I heard my younger sister say, "What is Jenny, me, doing, sitting on top of that stop sign?" The stop sign is located next to the gate. After that, they walked on. I was a bit confused. It was about to chase after them, but then, through the leaves, I saw a shadow of someone running past the bushes I was behind. I could also hear the sound of footsteps. I stood up quickly to see who was there. No one was in sight. After this, I ran to my sisters and told them what I had seen. They then told me that they saw me, or what looked like me, sitting on top of the stop sign. They said I had a very angry, disfiguring grin. After we traded stories, we ran home quickly. Later, my younger sister told me that the ghost she saw on my bed and the ghost she saw on the stop sign both looked exactly like me. Possible doppelganger? I don't know. It all began around the 1st of June, this very year. This incident took place in my grandmother and grandfather's house. My grandfather had been diagnosed with cancer in the summer of 1998, and I didn't know that these last few months would be the last time I would ever see him alive. During that period of time, I'd spent a whole lot of time with my grandparents, and had felt like I actually gotten a little closer to them both, but especially my grandfather. At the end of the summer I left, and went back home. Subsequently, about 5 months later, our family received a disturbing phone call. It was from my grandmother. Unfortunately, she informed us about the passing of our grandfather. He had passed away in the hospital. We went back to our grandmother's home, which was the very last place that our grandfather lived in before his passing, a month and a half after we had been staying there. I noticed that something just didn't feel right. The whole atmosphere had changed. I decided to take the guest room. For some reason, I always got the feeling that I was being watched in the guest room. Then, other little occurrences started to evolve. The very first was, I always felt like somebody was standing over my shoulder. I started to notice scars on my back after I would awake in the mornings, and I would feel light touches on my back. My mom and brother both complained about the door handles being rattled and opening and closing really fast. Cabinet doors would fly open, and the pots and pans would all fall out. My hair would get pulled in the night. Objects would fall from midair, such as paper, and I would hear voices, one of which said, "Wake up," very loudly in my ear. I would see mists and rays of light shoot past me extremely fast, and so fast in fact, I could feel a whoosh of air. I would notice some of my belongings missing, such as my CDs, jewelry, and money to name a few. Usually the belongings that I would use around the house a lot. I would feel my bed move, as if someone were to bump into it during the night, flickering lights, and last, but certainly not least, since animals can sometimes see things that humans cannot see, my cat would turn her head really fast and just stare at something, which I would not be able to see for a significant amount of time. A little while later, about a month after being there, I saw the unthinkable. After I had sound sleep for about 7 hours or so, I woke up suddenly to a spirit at the foot of my bed, and it was my grandfather. I could not believe what I was seeing, but I will describe this to you in full detail. There was no doubt in my mind that this was actually a spirit. He was shadow-like, but his clothing was colored. He would always wave at me, and sure enough, he was waving in my direction with a smile on his face. It was plain to see that he was trying to get my attention. He just wanted to see me. I was too afraid to move a muscle, in fear that in spite of everything else, that he would approach me. I had never seen anything like this before in my entire life. I didn't want to tell this to anyone though. I thought that nobody would believe me, or even listen. About a week later, I was in the kitchen with my mom, and she told me that the guest room was where our grandpa had stayed before he died, because he was too ill. That explains the reason why that very room felt like the most eerie room in the house. I almost fainted whenever I discovered that, but I knew that a spirit can travel anywhere in the home, even outside or in back of the house. But it wasn't until a month later that I decided to come out with the news. I first confided in my mom and brother, and my mother believed me, because she said that before I brought up anything that I had said. Our grandmother had experienced the exact same thing, that he was at the foot of the bed watching over her and smiling. I had a phone conversation with her, and I let her do all the talking fast, and everything that she told me measured up with my experience. And it only happened to my grandmother and I, whom he was the closest with, before he passed away. Everyone was wondering why I didn't scream or attempt to run out of the guest room as soon as I saw him, but I was too afraid. Whenever you're that close to something like that, it just takes your breath away completely. I was in my own little calm. I felt very uncomfortable. It wasn't until I started sleeping in the living room sofa that I felt appeased. Albeit, this has not been my first experience. Ever since I was the age of 5, my family and I started traveling around a lot, and we would move here and there. I've went to 9 different schools total. I'm 17 now. In previous homes, I've experienced a whole lot. I lived in a haunted house for a total of 3 years. Not only by all the experiences that I've endured, I've been doing many researches involving the paranormal. I'm really good at picking up on things too, which I've found out. There was this one house that we went into that we were thinking about purchasing, but I felt like something was wrong. There were many rooms in the home that I could just not stop venturing off into. The main ones were the master bedroom and the study. After I left the house, I told my parents that someone from the house must have passed away, someone that used to stay in the master bedroom. So, my mom went to go look up the history of the house, and sure enough, the owner and his wife, on a trip to California, got killed in a car wreck, and they lived in the master bedroom, and the owner spent most of his time in the study. After I was enlightened with that information, I was in disbelief. I still am, even to this day. My mom told me that it goes back to her being Jewish and Indian. She said that she can pick up on and see things too. She claims that it's an Indian thing, but I don't know. maybe it is. Anyways, God bless everyone, and thank you for your time. Great website, by the way. I'm a current visitor. Hello. I have a lot of experiences to share. I've been told that I'm more in tune with the spiritual world, and that's why a lot of stuff happens to me. Anyways, I'll just share some that I can remember. One night, my friend Amanda was having a sleepover with 3 other girls, and someone brought along a Ouija to play. We were playing and having fun because it was spooky. After that, we went to sleep at about 12, and we slept on a trundle that came out of the couch. We were the only ones in the house because her mom was out. Anyways, I woke up and shook everyone awake because I had a bad feeling, and I heard the closet door slamming all night. It was pitch black, so I told for my friend to turn on the light. She did, but it blew out. She tried it again, but it blew out once more. I thought bulbs can only blow out once. We were really scared, and we saw this black mass approaching us and closing in on us. We jumped up and all ran out of the house. We were really spooked and didn't go back inside for like 2 hours. One time, when I was about 7, I'd been staying at my grandparents' house for Easter vacation. I'd got up to sleep in this one room, but for some reason, I didn't like it. Well, one night, I woke up because I felt someone watching me. There's a door that leads to my room, and right next to it is a door that leads to the backyard. I sat up in bed, and right in front of the back door was this figure. It was about 6 foot, and they appeared to have armor on. I was afraid because I knew it was bad, but I wasn't able to run away because the door to get out of the room was right next to where the spirit was. I just looked at it, and it wouldn't let me go. Finally, after like 2 minutes, it faded away, and I ran out of the room and refused to sleep in there again. Another time, at my mom's house, I was home alone, and I was watching TV in the living room. I heard the bath water running, and so I ran to the bathroom to turn it off. I thought it must have been loose or something, so I tightened it. I closed the door and resumed watching TV again. It somehow turned on again, so I tightened it again. This continued on for another 4 times, and I still didn't know what it was. In my dad's house, an old lady supposedly died there. I never sleep with the light off because I like to be able to see who and what is in my room. Anyways, I always get knocks on my door, even though it's open, and one night, I felt like someone was sitting on my chest while I was sleeping. My older sister seems to get bugged more. Someone tickles her feet, pokes the bottom of her mattress while she's sleeping, and breathes behind her when she's on the computer. In this same house, in my bedroom, I hung this picture about 6 inches across and 3 inches wide of this rapper Dr. Dre on my wall. The next day, there were scratches that had torn through the picture, although it was still on the wall. This freaked me out because I was the only one visiting my dad that weekend, and he doesn't have any pets. I put tape over it just to cheaply laminate it and see if she could or would scratch it again. The morning after that, I was surprised to find it scratched again. It freaked me out, but I left the picture there. I don't think she likes rap very much, and I think she and they take and hide things. These may not sound scary, but when they happen to you, it is. I have many more, but I can't remember anyone right now. Thanks for listening, and I'm sorry it was so long. I've submitted a story on the site before, but since then, I've had another experience, so here it goes. I'm in my late teens, and during the summer, I stay home alone. One day around 11 a.m., I use the computer, and out in the hallway out of the corner of my eye, I saw a completely black figure, about 6 foot 5 inches tall, and very skinny. When I glimpsed around to make sure no one was in the house, the figure was gone. It happened to me about 4 more times over the next 2 weeks. I started calling them the Shadow Man. Then one day, When I was in the kitchen, I saw another shadow man. But this time, when I looked around my shoulder, a can of soup fell onto the floor, and the window was closed, and the cat was in the basement. Another moment, I was with my friends in the woods. Keep in mind, these are small woods, and there are never any hunters or trappers there. We were talking about ghost stories, and I told them about the shadow man. A minute later, we heard a rustling in the bushes, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow man. Then when I turned to catch a glimpse of it, it was gone. I asked my friends if they saw that, and one of them said yes, and the rest looked at me like I was crazy. I'm not sure if these are spirits or just an overactive imagination, but I usually don't imagine things like that. Since the experience in the woods, I haven't seen a shadow man since, but you never know. I could see one again sometime. Thanks for listening. My name is Kara, and I have another story I would like to share. This encounter, or whatever it's called, took place in the kitchen. It was about midnight, or 1 in the morning. My mother was asleep. I was on the computer, playing brain teasers or something, and my dog, Susie, a collie, was lying next to me in my chair. As I was playing my game, Susie started to make a noise, in between a bark and a growl. I looked to see what she was staring at, and she was looking into the kitchen. Our house is little, but it's cozy. I couldn't see anything, so I took it as attention-seeking and hushed her. About 10 minutes later, Susie was sitting in the corner directly across from where I sat, and she made a deep growling noise that was so unnatural to me, and she bared her teeth. Not at me, but towards the kitchen. I didn't want to look for her, I admit fear. I thought I would see someone like a burglar of some sort. I looked out of the corner of my eye, and that's when I saw a very, very large white dog. Looked like a wolf dog to me, because it was so large. It had eyes as blue as the sky, and fur as white as snow. It didn't look threatening, but intimidating. It just laid there by the recycling bin, and stared at me. Susie whimpered, and caught my attention. I looked at the corner of my eye, and the dog was gone. That night, everything was so still, quiet, freaky, the way nothing seemed to be able to move, like a pause button had been invented to freeze the noise after the dog had vanished. I went to my room to lay down, but my room was piled with clothes, books, etc., so I decided to go to my mother's room to sleep, since her bed was a king size and clean. The time passed by as I laid there. 1:30, 2:30, 3:30 a.m., all the way to 4:30 a.m. I just stared at the wall with the background of my mother's snores. I glanced at my mom's door for a second, and there, perched on the door, was a dark cat figure. It had evil green eyes, fur as though it had caught the dark glistening of nighttime. I stared at it for no more than 10 minutes. I rubbed my eyes. It was gone. It seemed as though someone played the sound button again, like the mute button wouldn't work. I looked out the window on my left, and I saw a cat crossing the street, and I decided to doze off. But something didn't seem right. It was like the temperature dropped 20 degrees in the room. I didn't like it, and neither did Susie. She sleeps at the foot of Mother's bed. She gave a very low growl and came over to lay next to me. I pet her for a minute and glanced at the hallway and saw what appeared to be an overgrown house cat. I fell asleep 10 minutes after that. I still don't know the connection between the dark cat figures and the white dog, but if you happen to know, I'd like to hear from you. I'd been reading through everyone's stories, and I decided that maybe I should go ahead and share one of my own. I'm 30 years old now. This happened when I was 4 years old. My parents and I were traveling to Oklahoma City to visit my mom's sister. Mind you, this is a short story, but definitely very eerie. Anyway, on the night before we arrived at my mom's home, we stayed the night at a hotel. My mother is not one to be inconvenienced. She needs her own space. So instead of staying in my aunt's house, she put in a stay at a cheap motel. My father obliged her. Now mind you, I did not know about what happened that night until I was about 15, because my mother was so freaked out about what happened that night that she did not tell me about it until then. Only then did it come out in conversation. She said that sometime during the night, while her and my father were asleep on one bed, and I was asleep on the other, at about 3 or 4 in the a.m., I sat straight up and proceeded to scream. She said that my father tried to console me, but I would not stop, and the worst thing about it was that I did not sound like a small girl. She said I sounded like a grown woman in agony. After a second or two of my father trying to speak to me to calm me down, nothing seemed to work, so he had no choice but to shake me violently. They said that I looked at them and laid back down like nothing even happened. Mom said her and her dad stayed up the rest of the night, and all was well. However, when we arrived at my aunt's house during dinner, my mother brought up the subject, and she explained to my aunt in detail what had happened. My mom said my aunt froze and looked across at my uncle. That was when she proceeded to tell me about the trench coat man. My mom asked, "Who was the trench coat man?" She said last night, while she was sleeping, and while that incident was occurring with her daughter, she was awakened by a trench coat man. A dark figure in a trench coat, of course. He was just staring at her. My aunt then described the eyes that she saw. This man had crystals in his eyes, as if his eyes were so cold, like he didn't care about anybody. So this dark trench coat man, blurred figure with glowing glacial eyes, kept staring at her until he eventually disappeared 5 seconds after. That was when my aunt screamed, and my uncle woke up, asking what was the matter. Of course, that was when my aunt went on to explain seeing the presence of this man. After thinking long and hard about the incident, I'm able to conclude that this was a paranormal incident that occurred telepathically. I must have detected that something was wrong with my aunt, and I guess I was trying to scream to let someone know that something was wrong at the moment, even though I was not conscious and I had no idea what was going on at the moment. The real question I really like to know is, who was that trench coat man? What was he doing talking to my aunt? Or what did he want from her? I know a lot of people are going to say this is a load of bull, and believe me, I really wish it was too. But the fact of the matter is, it actually happened. Ghosts are real, and you don't want to come face to face with them. This is just a collection of experiences I've had, and I don't know if they go together or make any sense at all. First was when I was about 8, and me and some of my friends were out in the backyard telling ghost stories. All of a sudden, we heard a deep voice slowly calling our names. It seemed to come from behind a shed in the backyard, and we all ran away from it. We ran into the house, and then calmed down, thinking it must have been my father. But then I realized my father was at work, and all of our neighbors were pretty up there in age, and I doubted they even knew our names. We were calming down in my room when I looked out the window, and about 200 feet away in an empty field, I saw the outline of what seemed to be a man, but was totally black. But it was in the middle of the day. I couldn't even speak. I finally yelled as it was walking away, and I think when I yelled, it turned and looked back at me. I I never saw it again, and even writing about this is bringing tears to my eyes. The other experiences I had were in the same room, in my grandma's house. When I was young, I used to sometimes go to my grandmother's and stay for a weekend or a night. One night, I was sleeping, and I got up half asleep, in some sort of confusion of hearing something in the hallway. I looked down the hall, and there seemed to be a shadow of a tall man against the curtains, with moonlight shining through them. I wasn't scared like the first time, but I actually felt like this man was watching over me, and for some reason, I had a weird feeling it was my great-grandfather. The other time, when I was about 16, I was actually living in that room because I had moved out of my parents' house temporarily. It was a typical night. I laid down to go to sleep, but was having some trouble. I finally started to get drowsy, and I rolled over onto my other side, and then out of nowhere, I hear my name whispered urgently into my ear. I even felt the air. I jumped up, and no one was there. I had the door closed, but my grandpa was somewhat of a jokester, so I thought maybe he was pulling a prank. So I got up and looked down the hall, and I saw him and my grandma in bed, watching TV. He may be a prankster, but I doubt he can run that fast. I'm 18 now, and I haven't seen or heard anything weird since, but I also don't spend very much time at my grandma's house anymore. Thanks for reading. I've been pondering where to begin and which experiences to prioritize. I decided to begin at the beginning and submit separate accounts of my experiences chronologically. In other words, I've got many stories to share. I've read nearly half of the stories on this site, which is a really worthwhile form, and I hadn't realized that much of what I've brushed off, for whatever reason, is something that matters to others enough to write about it. My experiences are not earth-shattering compared to what many have endured, but I think they're worthy of reading about. When I was about 7 years old, my mother became involved with her friend's Jehovah's Witness study group. Now that I look back on it, I might want to mention that this was in the mid-70s, and my parents and those friends, a couple, were classic long-haired hippies, and they did their share of the stoner scene. My mother and Grace, her friend, were in a study group with Grace's mother-in-law, and all older white-haired, straight-laced women. They eventually ended up at our house to study, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Theory is this: my mother, who was raised strictly Catholic, was going to become a nun, only to do as her grandmother, Granny, wished. They were very close, and my mother wanted to make Granny proud. That all went out the window when she met my father. She thinks that the opposing forces seemed very interested in having her on their side, kind of like vying for her soul. I know it sounds far out, but I kind of believe it, from witnessing and experiencing the darker aspects of it as a result. She also had many things happen to her all of her life that make my story seem lame. It is prevalent on the maternal side of my family to have had experiences with the otherworldly beings. Anyway, shortly after my mother started fraternalizing with the study group, something sickening started to happen in our house. We had the fold-up, pull-down type of chairs to the attic and our living room ceiling. There was a door at the top of them, but it wasn't at the head of the stairs, as this area was open. Instead, for some reason, it was opposite. If one were to walk around to the back of the attic, open this door, and proceed through it, they'd fall into the living room through the opening in the ceiling. Well, this door started to be slammed with a force that shook the entire house. It scared the living hell out of us. It was really that horribly violent. My parents pulled down the stairs, and this door was ajar. They shut it. It kept happening often. They somehow tied the door shut by the knob. It still happened, but worse. The windows literally shook. Pull the stairs down. It was still tied shut. One day, during the late summer, the group was over at our house, doing whatever prayer stuff they do. My father was at work, and my older brother, Grace's kids, and I were playing outside. We heard screaming coming from inside the house. We ran inside to hear the attic door slamming, beyond what any door should sound like, and this horrid, guttural growling noise coming from up there. It just sounded that awful, that no one can convince me that whatever it happened to be was ever human. Everyone ran screaming out of the house, to their cars, and they were telling my mother to get us too, and get out of that house. Well, we left for a little while, but my mother decided we couldn't be homeless, so we went home. Not my idea of a good time. It continued to happen, usually lasting 5 or so minutes. It happened at least once a night. Well, my mother had an experience shortly after we had gone back to school. She claims that when she was home alone in the living room, with the windows open, the air just went silent. No birds chirping, no chipmunks, no locusts buzzing, nothing. We all lived in the country, away from any other houses. She said she started hearing the sound like a vacuum cleaner. It got louder and louder, and seemed to pulsate. It filled the room, and the walls looked as if they were buckling and waving. She smelled this horrid, rotting stench, and she kinda knew she was in for something pretty awful. She ran into her room. I'd have run the hell out of the house, and jumped into her bed. She pulled the covers over her head. She said she heard something walking slowly across the living room, towards her doorway, which was open. She was just praying, not daring to look. It sounded to her as if it were dragging a heavy cloak behind it, and it was breathing extremely heavy. It was nearly at her bed, and she was just about dying of fear when apparently our school bus pulled up, and it dissipated. She'd apparently had enough. She took any religious materials she had brought into the house from the group, not including her Bible that she had gotten from Granny, which she kept, and burned it in the fire pit out back. I remember being upset when she took both my brothers and my books, which I guess you could say was like kids' versions of Bibles. They were small, pink, hardcover books, and they had pictures, and were easy to understand for me at that reading level. I absolutely loved to read, and it didn't matter what it was. I cried, but they got burned anyway. Well, I got over it soon, as nothing more of that nature ever happened at that house. It left as quickly as it came. It was evil. I strongly believed demonic, and it seemed like it was satisfied that my mother quit the group and burned the literature associated with it. It was not associated with the house. It came with a purpose, and left having achieved its goal. The only other thing I associate with this battle of good and evil of my mother happened when I was in 7th grade. I was trying to sleep, totally different house, but I swore my bed was shaking. I just figured I was being stupid, but it got worse. Still, I tried to dismiss it. It got bad enough to where I became scared crapless. I got up and went out to the living room. I startled my mother. She asked me what was wrong. I told her, and she got these big, weird-looking eyes, like she said she was spooked. She said, "Oh my God, I was just reading the Bible." She rarely opened it, for fear of bringing something on. Well, I was just fine with her not reading it, if it was going to target me to get to her. I just wanted to be left out of the whole thing. I know that probably sounds ignorant, but I truly felt it was demonic, and it scared me out of my mind. After what happened, I felt anything bad might just pop up at any time. Even though I'm not close to my mother, haven't spoken to my family in about 14 years, my heart does go out to her on whatever her spiritual fate is to be. She's not the best person, but but she isn't inherently evil, just a broken, miserable woman from years of abuse by both her father and my father. This experience added to my straying from any traditional religion. All I knew of Christianity was what my mother told us as kids, and some of what I read in my pink Bible-like Bible book, and it wasn't much. I'd always had my own thoughts about the whole heaven and hell concept, but I was afraid of burning in this hell if I strayed from it. It just didn't sit right with me. It always scared me, including the concept of God. My concept of him was that he was very quick to punish anyone who had their own free thoughts and let people roast at the drop of a hat. I always felt spirituality shouldn't be a frightening experience, but I didn't have the hair on my butt when I was young to explore my inner beliefs. I was never baptized, and I suppose I'm pagan, if anything. It's confusing, but as much as I don't adhere to the whole Bible concept, I can't dismiss it for others. To end this story, I just want to thank you for taking the time to glimpse into my reality. I also have to acknowledge that some of you may have thought that much of it was due to my parents' use of weed, but myself and all of the others didn't imagine something so wretched. Rest assured, ladies of the study group wouldn't have been altered. The very last noteworthy thing of my mentioning, in accordance to the subject, is that I did later independently, and most unwillingly, encounter another demon-like thing when I was 19. Yes, quite another story. Please tune in. I've experienced quite a bit throughout my life when it comes to the paranormal, and it all started at my old childhood house. It was a 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom home in Garden Grove, California. If you were to drive by and look at this house, it's cute, and it's a little home in a good environment. However, the things I've experienced sparked my interest and curiosity about the afterlife. Everything in every room in the house felt awkward whenever I walked into it. I shared the middle bedroom with my younger brother, who was only 4 at the time. Once a month, I would have a nightmare of a girl sitting on her picket fence with red eyes aglow, staring at me with such a playful expression. She didn't seem happy that her family was there. Nonetheless, us kids. The strange part about that was, whenever I would have these awful dreams, I would wake up to find my little brother crying, as if someone had really hurt him. I never really took the nightmare seriously though. We had an old, rusty swing set that we loved so much. I was only 10 at the time. During the daytime, everything would be fine, and no strange feelings would occur. However, once nighttime falls, our backyard would be off limits. My mom wouldn't let us go to the back and play on summer nights, and she, well, never told us why. One night, my mom forgot to turn off the water hose, so she kindly asked me if I would do it for her. The idea of it was already bothering me, but I didn't take anything paranormal into consideration. So, I went down, straight to the back of the house, and the walk there felt like eternity itself. I had a strong, eerie feeling that I was being watched, and even followed. I bent down to turn off the hose, and had a fear so strong that it made me tear up. I ran into the house, and swore never to do the favor for my mother again. What made this incident particularly eerie was the fact that I swear I heard a sobbing. It was like in my mind, but I swear it was outside. In another awkward time, my mom was taking a shower, and I was in my room watching TV with my little brother. I heard her call my name, so I came to see what she wanted. She asked if I could go to the towel cabinet and grab her one. When I did, I walked up to the door in pure darkness, and I swear I saw a ghostly hand, but it was still a woman's hand with red fingernails. I immediately thought it was my mom's hand at first. The strange thing was, it was translucent. Like I said, a ghostly hand. But I mean, you could see right through this person's hand. So, naive as I was, I thought I said Mom, and instinctively handed her the towel. But the towel dropped to the ground, and the hand disappeared. My mom then opened the door and looked at me, saying, "Barbara, what are you doing, honey?" That's when I told her, "I was giving you the towel you wanted." My mom looked at me with such confusion and said, "You know I was in the kitchen, right?" When I look back at that incident, I know it terrifies me now, but at that moment, I was simply not afraid. I just chalked it up to something non-paranormal, and maybe my eyes were just playing tricks on me. But at that moment, it was pretty obvious that I was both hearing and seeing things come to life. Paranormal things at that. There was much more that went on in that house, such as if you were sitting in the living room watching TV, at the corner of your eye, you will see a dark figure walking up to the front door. Immediately, you would assume someone was here, so you trot over to the door to find that no one is there. It happens almost every week to everyone in my family. I love that house, but I didn't love being followed or the feeling of being watched while taking a bath. After spending most of my childhood in that house, we moved to another city nearby. Now this house is quite dramatic. I'm 19 years old now, and I lived in Georgia for 3 years to finish up school. Coming back, strange activities started happening, especially in my new room. My grandfather passed away 3 years ago, and my room used to be his room. At night, getting home from my boyfriend's house, I would hear the floor creaking. I just assumed there was someone walking around, but to find that no one was out there at all. I remember one night, laying on my bed with the lights out and just the TV glaring. I fell asleep and woke up to see a pair of transparent, veiny legs pointing in my direction. I knew immediately who they belonged to. Grandpa. Grandpa was watching over me, and that didn't and still doesn't scare me. But there's another presence in the house. A girl, I assume. I came one night from staying at my boyfriend's the previous night. I left the door opened because I was planning on changing and going to say hi to my parents. While changing, I have a habit of looking at the door to see if anyone will walk by and see me change. So, I looked a few times, and when I looked the last time, at the right side of my door, I swear I saw the apparition of a girl, her bright blue eyes, glowing and bulging right at me through the crack of the door. The eyes then disappeared. I trotted to the door, looked to my right, and nobody was there. Just then, it was my teenage cousin, Diane. But I looked towards the left side of the hallway, and there she was. I was absolutely freaked out in that moment. Well, those were some documented instances of my family's paranormal history. I hope for future sake that I never have to experience any of this again. Even though the first few incidences weren't that scary, and even my grandpa incident, yeah, I wasn't scared. However, if it were any kind of other ghost, like the one I was just talking about, I might be a little bit more frightened. I'd like to refer to this haunting as the haunting in Duxbury, Vermont. We bought the house from the niece of Leo Morse in the fall of 1999. Leo lived here his entire life. Shortly after we moved in, we heard strange footsteps on the second floor when we knew no one was up there. During one such incident, my husband, myself, my 2 children, and a couple friends heard someone walking across the floor in the upstairs bedroom as we all stood in the living room below. One night, when I was taking a bath and was lying back in the tub with my eyes closed, I suddenly felt very uneasy, like someone was staring at me. I looked behind me to where the door was and saw this transparent mist, and it disappeared within a second. The door creaked open just an inch, and I screamed my head off. My son, while still in high school, had similar experiences of being watched by someone who couldn't be seen. Our television has also turned on by itself on more than one occasion. Our channels have changed, with the remote sitting out of everyone's reach. In the fall of 2007, my husband had just walked upstairs to go to our bedroom when I heard him hollering at someone and asking him what he wanted. We all ran upstairs to where my husband stood in the doorway to our bedroom. He was staring at the back wall of the other bedroom, pointing to no one and yelling, tears in his eyes, for someone who no one else could see to get out. This lasted for several minutes until the man, whom my husband said was in his early 30s, brown hair, clean shaven with round, wire frame glasses, dressed in a flannel shirt and blue jeans with the bottoms of the legs rolled into cuffs, disappeared. It was a very restless night that night, and my husband, who is not drunk or on drugs and isn't prone to hallucinations, doesn't like to talk about it much, but is very adamant that it truly happened. We haven't had any more sightings since then, but I still hear footsteps and unexplainable bangs and thumps coming from upstairs every morning after I get up, and I know my husband is still sound asleep in our room. My name is Andrea. I'm from New Mexico, and I'm 17. I've had numerous experiences throughout my life with the paranormal. I'll start from the beginning, I suppose. Before moving to Deming back in 2000, I lived in Hatch, which is about an hour away. We used to live in what was called the White Brick House, near the park, and not even a half mile from the schools. Hatch is very small. Anyway, living in the house was my mom, my very abusive dad, who I call Alex. I don't even call him dad. My 2-year-old sisters, and my older brother, and me, the youngest. I don't remember the experiences in any specific order, but I remember them as if they happened yesterday. They are all very true. Believe if you want. We had a certain room called the back bedroom that no one really liked to go to, at least not alone. This room had an extremely strong presence in it, and it was only when you entered it you could feel its presence. You could stand in the doorway and look in the bedroom and feel nothing, but as soon as you stepped, that all changed. You feel like you're being watched by one great evil spirit, or a great number of evil spirits. You would have to leave. It was so uncomfortable. We couldn't even get any of the dogs that we had throughout the time we lived there to enter that room. While there was that room, there was also other things that happened in the rest of the house. One night, my mom swears up and down this happened, and so does Alex. They were getting along. The rare occasion. I love these nights. My mom put all 4 of us to bed, so her and Alex had some alone time, and were relaxing together in the spa, talking one night. In the middle of their conversation, both my mom and Alex saw the shadow of someone walk past the doorway of the spa room. My mom thought it was one of us that had gotten up in the night and went to check in on us, only to find us all snoring in bed. Her and Alex then asked us the next morning if we had gotten up, and none of us had. Another time, me and my oldest sister were playing in what we called the second kitchen that had a room off called the craft room. My mom paints ornaments in there. We suddenly smelled a strong perfume that didn't smell like any perfume made today. Then we heard a conversation between maybe 4 or 5 people. We looked in and saw 5 older upper-class people in clothes from the early 1900s time. I remember one man specifically. He was bald, with a brown beard and a looking-glass eyepiece like the rich people would wear back in the day. He was wearing a black penguin-tailed suit with a white button-up underneath. He looked somewhat pale, but not very transparent. He turned his head slowly and looked straight at me, not my sister, and nodded his head. Shortly after, he continued to speak with his company. I ran to my room and stayed there for the rest of the day. We had an organ in the living room, along with a drum set and Alex's guitars. We're all musicians. Amps would turn on, even when they were unplugged. The organ played as though a very experienced pianist were playing it. Piano was one thing none of us really learned how to play, so it was obvious none of us was playing it. There were times when the dogs would follow something we couldn't see down the hallway to my room and Alex's room. My older brothers one night got up to get a drink of water in the second kitchen, and that's where the laundry room also was. He's 22 years old now, and still swears this is true. He saw a tall figure standing by the washer and dryer near the back bedroom, and he felt it as an evil being. It just stood there, glaring at him, but never moved, as if it was frozen, but with the evil expression looking at him wherever he moved. He figured it was Alex. He shouted out Alex's name, but didn't hear a response, so he figured he was mad and went back to bed. The next morning he asked Alex why he was so mad at him. Alex just looked at him and said he was at the bar. My other sister said she was walking by the back bedroom one night and swears she saw a black figure out of the corner of her eye, standing straight up against the wall, and it tried to grab her with its arms, but couldn't reach, as if it was restrained. After Alex left, we moved out of the house and into a little apartment. There's only been one thing that has ever happened to me there. I got up in the middle of the night to get something to drink, and as I was going back to my room, I saw what looked like a little blue orb, glowing in intense blue. It moved around for a few minutes, before ultimately dissipating into thin air. Aside from these apartments we lived in, we also moved into a trailer not too far from the white brick house. This house was always said to be haunted because the man who used to live there died of a heart attack in either the yard or the bathtub, and he had 2 dogs that died of mysterious causes after he did. It was almost as if they died of a broken heart. There would be nights when we could hear the clicking sounds of a dog's nail on the tiles. I was in my room reading one night when my whole dresser just fell over. No reason for it just to fall over. My friend and I, Rosario, and my sister were all in the living room one night when we heard a window shatter come from my room. We never found a single shard of broken glass in the house or even outside, even though the sound came from inside. Finally, I would always see the shadow of someone walk into the laundry room, and no one would be there when I looked. All of these incidents were fairly alarming to all of us, and I'm convinced that they were being followed by the same evil spirit that resided in the red brick house. These days, I never experienced any hauntings, and I'm very glad that this is all over. In the fall of 2001, my parents bought an old Victorian house in a quiet suburb. It was a huge relief for us because that year was a very tumultuous time for our family. We couldn't find a house that was affordable, and nearly every house we found in the area was either in need of major repairs or super expensive. When we moved into this home, there had been mumblings around town that nobody wanted it due to its supposed hauntings. By the way, I'm 21. The house had a history of violence and death. The city is very safe now, but years ago, it was considered one of the worst cities to live in. It was said that a man who had lived his entire life as a loner took up residence in the house in the early 1920s. One night, he apparently hired a prostitute to stay the night with him. She was unaware that he had no money to pay her for her services. He led her into the kitchen, playing off that he had some spare cash lying around the house. He ultimately ended up strangling her to death and chopping up her body. He was apprehended months later and ended up dying in prison. When the cops questioned him, all he could say was that he needed love. In the first months, we had stereotypical noises that any house would make and dismissed it as nothing more than just noises. However, doors would open and close, lights would flicker on and off, and there was this funky odor that always seemed to linger throughout the house. It was very hard to describe, but it smelled a lot like rotten eggs on a very subtle level. The most terrifying thing that occurred was when I was in the kitchen in the middle of the night. It was about 11 p.m., and I had just come home from work and entered the front hallway of the house at first. That's when I heard whispers, which sounded like the word lonely. I figured I was just exhausted from a long day's labor, so I decided I needed to get to bed. But before I did, I fixed myself something to eat in the kitchen. I walked into the kitchen, but that's when I heard moaning sounds, almost like someone was struggling. As I sat on the chair by the kitchen table, I saw the transparent figure of a woman with an anguished look on her face. She appeared for a few moments, then disappeared. She looked like she was from another era and wore all black. Her face looked disfigured and beaten. It terrified the living hell out of me, so I ran upstairs to get my parents. I guess I just needed some comforting, and I found out they weren't home yet. There were other incidents that occurred in that house. My mom actually told me that she was in the laundry room when she could distinctly hear the sounds of a growling man in the laundry room late at night. This was something that seemed to happen quite frequently around the same time, and always only in the laundry room, nowhere else. It was never something really loud and startling. It was always faint, but insanely scary. There were times that we would see two shadows in the corner of our eyes constantly walk back and forth from the kitchen to the living room. Again, this was subtle. When anybody would actually turn to directly look, these shadows would be gone. Most of the time, we always thought it was just our eyes playing tricks on us, and even after my incident, I still thought that. Anyway, that's my story. It might not be too exciting compared to others, but it is creepy and insane. I'm glad I don't live in that house anymore. Sadly, my parents still do, but it seemed that nothing happens anymore, besides the subtle doors creaking open slowly from time to time, and the continuation of lights flickering. Thanks for reading. My family and I took a trip to Tennessee in the summer of '08. We went all over the place, such as Jackson and Nashville. On our second to last day before we left to go home, my family decided to go to Franklin because we had picked up a brochure of haunted places in Tennessee, and so we went to humor me because I was interested in hauntings at the time. This city, not known to most people, is actually the site of the bloodiest battle of the Civil War, even worse than Gettysburg. There are two houses that were the main sites. One of them was the Carnton Plantation, which is the setting to my story. The plantation was creepy enough when we drove up to it, without even knowing the history. When I got out of the car, I looked up at the house and noted how beautiful it was. Then my attention was averted to the balcony on the second floor. There, standing on it, was a man. He was clearly dressed in a Civil War uniform, though I quite can't remember which color, and I could clearly see that he had a beard covering his jawline. He stood there with his arms behind him, as if he was gazing out, overlooking troops. Of course, at the time, not knowing any of the history, I thought it was just a tour guide taking a break out on the balcony. I even hoped he was going to be my family's guide. Later, once we were on the tour, I noticed that none of the employees were dressed like 19th century citizens. Of course, then we got the history of the place, and I understood why this place was considered haunted. When the battle itself was both going on, and when it was over, injured soldiers were treated inside of the house. So many, in fact, that there are stains of blood inside of the house that will not come out of the floor. Many soldiers obviously died inside of the house. When we continued our tour upstairs, we entered a room with a door to the balcony. This is where I learned that no one was allowed out on the balcony. This confused me since I'd seen that man out there. When the guide took the group into the room across the hall and began talking, I couldn't pay attention. The closet in the other room kept grabbing my attention because it had a piece of black cloth in it. Finally, I tried to keep myself focused, and it was going well until a gentleman in the group got bored and decided to go out into the hall. I watched him leave, thinking that it was very rude and should come back. For some reason, when he left, I noted that the sun was in a position that didn't cast a shadow of the man's head on the hallway wall. Once again, I turned my attention back to the guide, but the man in the hallway began to wander in the hall, and that distracted me. When I turned to watch the man, there was suddenly a very clear and defined silhouette of a man's head and shoulders with a bearded face that traveled across the wall, then just disappeared. It startled me at first. Then I got excited because I thought I must have seen a ghost. Then I thought, no, I have to be practical about this because that man is out in the hallway. Once the tour guide was done talking, I went outside into the hallway way. The first thing I noticed was that any shadow from the tourists on the wall wasn't that dark or defined. Then I noticed that the way the sun was facing caused the shadows to be cast in a completely different wall. The silhouette I saw couldn't have been from anyone on the tour. Then I noticed that there was an upstairs where I thought maybe an employee could be working. That theory was completely dismissed when it appeared no one was up there. There wasn't any logical explanations for the silhouette. It wasn't until my family returned home a few days later that I decided to research what I had seen. After discovering that there was a frequent spirit there that was called the General, I made the connection. The details from past eyewitness accounts were identical to mine. He stands out on the porch, has a Civil War uniform on, and has a beard on his face. I was, and still am convinced, that I saw the General on that day. This took place shortly after I had turned 16. My dad was working up in Oregon and Washington, but was based out of Rainier. I went up to live with him, I guess just to do something different. I was used to being around the city type of atmosphere, and it wasn't too long before I grew bored. Not that the Oregon country girls in that area didn't stir my blood. It's just that they mainly wanted to waste their time getting high or drunk, tipping cows, or shooting the passing ships going down the Columbia River, which I don't mind. I just miss the city lights or something. Anywho, I'd been out partying with a friend and drove off the side of a mountain. Another story, which would take a while to go through, and I thought my dad was probably going to kill me anyway, without benefit of blindfold and a last smoke, so I decided to hitchhike back to Oklahoma. Needless to say, I lacked understanding of just how far I was from Oklahoma. My newfound compadre decided to go along, because he had gotten in recent trouble with his folks and wanted out of town too, so we took off. Somewhere between Portland and the Dells, on I-84, which was only a 2-lane at that spot. We were really tired and looking for a place to sleep. By this time, I'd found out that this hitchhiking thing wasn't for me, and it really should be called a lot of hiking and not enough hitching, or something similar. And what seemed weird was that out in the middle of nowhere, the fences were really well kept, and I didn't want to get caught up climbing one. No houses, no anything. It was simply just nice fences. Anyway, we found a rather peevish looking fence about 3/4 of a mile before a bend in the road. The moon was out and actually lit up the area pretty well. There was about 3/4 of a mile behind us from the last turn in the road, and like I said, about the same in front of us before the next one. We were in a valley or whatever they're called that the road went through, and it was really a beautiful sight. Just as we were fixing to jump the fence, a car came around the bend from in front. Of course it was too far off to see us when it rounded the bend, but we didn't want it to see us climbing the fence when it came abreast of us, like the owners of the land are out cruising in the middle of the night. The sides of the road in that area sloped down at a very sharp right and were gravel, at least on our side of the road, so you didn't have to go far to be below the grade of the road and out of sight of passing motorists. It went down probably 15 feet though, well below the road. Come to think of it, I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like that since. Just as we were sliding down the slope out of sight, I caught sight of something way down the road, just the side of the curve. The lights of the oncoming car caught it, just as it was making the curve. Whatever it was, went down the embankment on the opposite side of the road from us. I asked my friend if he saw it, and he said yes, he saw something. After the car passed, we peeked over the top of the road, and right when we started to climb back onto the roadway, because we decided we didn't want to sleep in that area anyway, we saw what appeared to be two guys pushing a motorbike climb up where we saw it go off before. This was still about 3/4 of a mile at least off, down the hill near the curve. We slid back down the slope, out of sight. I really don't know why. Then we kinda just looked at each other. A motorbike? We both looked at the incline behind us. If you pushed a motorbike off the side of the road down this embankment, you'd have a heck of a time stopping it before it went all the way down, and the river was on their side, and even a harder time getting back up. I couldn't imagine trying to get it back up to the road, assuming it didn't go into the river. We both peeked over the top, breathing really quiet and shallow, watching for another couple of minutes, when all of a sudden, it stood up. It wasn't two guys pushing a motorbike. It was something that had been on all fours and stood up, and it was huge. At least twice as tall as us, and by the way, we weren't midgets. I almost crapped myself. I started looking around, and the fence, by this time, was looking mighty small. Thinking really fast in that fight or flight mode, and the flight was definitely the way I was leaning towards, I realized that, thank God it had been his turn to carry the backpack, which would slow him down, and had the only food we had in it, and on top of that, I thought I could outrun him. Maybe it wouldn't want both of us. I looked at him, saw the panic in his eyes, and knew he was thinking along the same lines. I knew I couldn't run. I also knew that I had to sense us when it got directly across from us. I pulled out my little pocket knife. I knew that we're going to die, and all I could think of was, Lord, please let it be quick. I peeked over the top again, and it was almost even with us. I might have whimpered, silently of course, but I also noticed that the wind was blowing in my face from his direction. There might be hope. We ducked back down, and we could hear it almost stop right across from us for a moment or two, then start on up the road again. It was almost to the curve up the hill from us from the direction we had originally came from, when another car came around the bend downhill.
I thought about jumping out in front of it and yelling for help, but if it didn't stop, then whatever that was would know that we were there. We waited, and it disappeared below the other side of the road, like before when the other car came. This time, it didn't come back up. I don't know how long we waited, but we finally climbed back up and continued down the hill and around the curve. We didn't say a word or breath, anything about a whisper, till we cleared that bend in the road and was a mile or two away. When we called the Dallas, we called our parents to come and get us. We'd had enough of the open road in Oregon. I don't know what that was, but I still think about it sometimes. I've had a few other things happen to me in my life, but that really scared me. My boyfriend and I saw the state park on our way from Arkansas to Illinois and thought we should check it out. We'd never heard of this place or even seen it before. We parked in the parking area and got out of the car to explore the woods. Naturally, I had to use the restroom, so I went to the bathroom, and once I got to the toilet, I had a terrible feeling of being watched, and I truly felt like someone was in the bathroom with me, but obviously, I was the only one. The feeling of this presence was so unbearing and evil that I ran out of the bathroom the second I finished with my pants down. Once I got out of the bathroom, my boyfriend and I started down the path. Within 30 seconds of walking, and still within 30 feet of the bathroom, my boyfriend and I heard a loud footstep, crunching the leaves. In fact, it was multiple footsteps. My boyfriend thought it was a bear or something, because of the heftiness of the steps, so he was searching and searching for a bear, or anything, but he couldn't find a thing. I didn't mention the bathroom to him, but after not too long, I insisted we continue. I know there is something terribly evil in that bathroom. For a while, nothing else odd occurred, and we continued on the path which goes down to level ground, with a large lake on one side. But soon after we got to this level ground area, the sun started settling, and that's when things got uneasy again. We both started to hear something large walking in the leaves again. Sean, my boyfriend, really wanted to see what it was, and at this point, I felt like we were really in danger, and that something else, unnatural, was there. So we barely started to move farther into the woods when Sean told me he saw a shadow or something farther in. Then, I was done. I told him we had to go, and I cannot be here any longer. So, I ran like hell back to the car, and Sean was close behind me. Once we got to the car, I was at the passenger door, ready for him to unlock it. And of course, he tells me that he hears that thing we've been hearing in the sparsely wooded area, directly in front of the parking lot, which is to the very right near the parking lot, and that he has to see what it is. So, I had him throw me the keys, and I got in the car. He got in within a minute, and I asked him if he saw anything, and he said he just saw that a dark shadow moved behind a tree, but nothing else. Needless to say, we booked it off that mountain, and it really seemed like a car was trying to chase us down the mountain. But we may have just been super spooked from the woods experience we just had. But I will note, we were driving at about 65 miles an hour, and the speed limit was way less. I forget now what it was specifically, but I want to say between 30 and 40 max. Plus, it was a mountain road, and very windy, and frankly, difficult to traverse at 65. Also, during the time I was taking pictures, the whole time we were in the woods, nature shots, that was actually the entire reason we were there in the first place, and the pictures were neat. The day ones didn't have orbs, but the night ones all did, and I thought maybe it was from the lake reflection or something. But I took a picture out of the car window, at the moon, right after we got in the car, and in that photo, there's the moon, and like 30 orbs. It's amazing to me. I mean, I've never taken any orb photo ever before, and I took another photo of the moon out my window about 30 minutes after we left the mountain, and only the moon. I did some research to find anything on the area. It seems it was established in an old Indian burial ground, but few findings on much else, and I never found anything on cars chasing you out of this place. Be careful. During the day, the bathroom is really the worst part, and seemingly off the trail, but I just wouldn't go at night. And also, Sean didn't seem to have the feelings as intensely as I did, so if you're the right person, the feeling might not be too overwhelming. I was thinking about my dog last night, as he was put away a few years ago, and the immediate remembrance of a very weird experience me and my dog had in my home in Tallahassee. This home, prior to any construction behind us, was all wooded landscape and ran into Lake Jackson. Within this wooded area were several Indian burial mounds. One day, shortly after I moved there for a new job, I took my dog for a walk, unleashed, back in the woods. I saw those mounds, but really did not know that they were Indian burial mounds. My dog and I both walked over these mounds just being adventurers. When I returned from our walk, my neighbor asked me jokingly if I let my dog run loose back there, and my response was yes. He then stated that I would see a black bird perched somewhere soon in a tree close by, and that this bird would be watching me. I laughingly asked why, and he said that if we walked over those mounds, we would have possibly wakened the spirits, and that the bird was their watchful eye on me. Well, of course I thought this man was crazy, but he was actually a very nice and intelligent man, as I learned later. So only about 2 days later, I returned home from work, and I recall thinking about the black bird Betty told me. So I peeked around the left side of the home to look into the wooded area, and lo and behold, there was a blackbird perched on a tree, staring at me. He would not take his eyes off either. Needless to say, that was creepy. So that very night, I was in my office, and my dog was usually laying in the living room by the fireplace. As I was doing my work in the office, my office chair was budged about 2 to 3 inches forward, with a force that felt like someone actually pushed the chair. I instinctively reached by, looking over my right side, expecting to see my dog. No dog, nothing. So I quickly went into the living room, only to see my dog laying down facing the hallway entrance, which is where my office resided, as well as 2 other bedrooms. And he had his head between his paws, staring and growling at something in the hallway. Talk about getting freaked out. So I grabbed my dog by his collar and tried to lead him down into the hallway, and he resisted every attempt. He was scared, obviously, and he definitely saw or sensed something. I did not see anything at all. As I walked into each room through that hallway, I did not see or sense anything. Then I walked into the bathroom in the master bedroom to find that my candle, which was lit, went out. So that night, I kept all lights on. The following day I came home and looked again for that weird bird. He was not there. So I took my dog outside to do his thing, but then noticed he was limping. Then he fell to his side with pain in the backyard. As I made the observation, I noticed that in his groin area, he had a large tumor-like bulge coming from this area. I immediately took him to the veterinarian, and I recall she had no explanation for it, but prescribed medication to reduce the swelling. Within 2 weeks or so, the swelling went away. Looking back at that, I really feel that the spirit, or whatever it was, made that happen, as my dog was still young and very healthy. After that week of weird occurrences, I never had anything further happen. I never told my neighbor what had happened, as I did not want to look silly or have rumors flying around. But for sure, I can tell you that I know in my own gut that what that neighbor told me came to life. Dogs can definitely sense or see these spirits, as we cannot apparently. Between the bird, the bump on my chair, my dog growling and acting scared, and the bulge in his groin area, all made sense that something was in that house. Never walked in those woods again. I no longer reside there either. This is a ghost, entity, evil demon spirit, and whatever else was haunting our home, I can tell you, I will never forget what happened as long as I breathe air. We moved into this big house when I was 15. It had been empty for about 10 years. It had old, creaky wood floors and a ton of doors. Everywhere you turned in the house, there was a door. Don't ask, I still can't figure it out. It was a doctor's house. In the very back of the house is where he saw his patients. Yes, some died in the house in his office. Both my grandparents also died there. The very first thought we had activity, about 3 a.m. in the morning, there was someone banging on our front door. My grandfather would get up and no one would be there. This happened all the time. We'd drop our car keys in the glass bowl right when we walked in, and they would be in a different part of the house. Things were always showing up all over the house. It likes to play tricks all the time. So many things happened, I can hardly recall them, all but this one I will never forget in my life. I would love to forget it, but it just won't go away. I was 20 years old and just had a baby. I had my daughter in a bassinet beside my bed. I fell asleep watching Michael Jordan play basketball in the Olympics. My bed had a tall headboard that sat up against my bedroom window. I also had floor-to-ceiling curtains, very heavy curtains. The windows were shut. The curtains were shut too. I was sleeping on my back as I fell asleep to the TV. The TV was still on, and the baby was fast asleep. All of a sudden, I felt a strong man's hand covering my whole face. He was trying to suffocate me. I was in panic mode. His grip on my face and nose was so tight that I couldn't breathe or scream. I was looking up at the ceiling thinking I'm gonna die, right there, right now. It seemed like an eternity, and I was losing my breath. Then, the phone beside my bed rang. It stopped. I jumped so far out of the bed across the room and looked back thinking I was fighting off an intruder, and no one was there. I looked out the window. Nothing. I looked in the mirror, and I had a bright red handprint on my face. It was evil. It was an evil something. I was praying out loud for whatever it was to get the hell out of my house and leave me alone. I've never been that terrified in my life. Never. I looked out the window, and it was pitch black. I got the feeling like something was out there laughing at me, or mocking me. The baby never woke up. It was her father on the phone. I told him what happened, but he thought it was a dream. I know from the start it was as real as I'm sitting here telling you today. Not long after that, my grandmother and grandfather died in the house on 2 separate occasions. I was left in this huge house all alone with my 2 children. They were 1 and just months old. The house was always freezing, no matter how high the heat was on. I would hear talking that I could never make out. Footsteps up and down the hallway, pinching, grabbing. The lights never worked. I changed the bulbs all the time. When I did the laundry where the old doctor's office used to be, I could feel a breath on my neck. I could see shadows of people out of the corner of my eye. It was a living nightmare. The energy was so thick and heavy, even on the brightest day. I was scared to death to be there alone, and go home after work alone. I would just sit up with the TV on until I could fall asleep and pray to God that I didn't have to go to pee in the night. I was so scared to get up. The day I moved from that house was the happiest day of my life. I could have stayed there forever in that big house, but I wanted out. I still to this day, 19 years later, have vivid dreams of what happened. All the things I heard and all the things I saw. I've only told a few people this story. I've seen and felt both good and evil from a very, very young age. My nanny told me I had the gift of seeing and hearing spirits, like I was a light to them. I've had so many experiences I can't count. Most are very bad, but I have a couple that are good. I'm terrified of the afterlife. I pray that God carries me to heaven. If you don't believe, I'm telling you, there are things you can't see, but they can hurt you and make you so depressed you want to die. They can touch you, hurt you, and mock you, and laugh in your face. I know. Here's my story. It will be interesting to see what everyone else thinks of all this. I was at a friend's house listening to music tonight, Saturday, April 12th. He's a drinker, so he was feeling pretty good. He was at the computer with his back to me. I was on the couch directly in front of the TV, which was off. The only light on was right above the computer desk. To my right was the entryway, which was dark, pitch black actually, but I could see the reflection of the room in the TV. He was playing "O Death" from "Brother Where Art Thou." Song itself gave me the creeps, when suddenly I looked into the TV and saw a solid black figure of a tall man start to step out of the darkness of the entryway and into the living room. I didn't see anything like clothing or facial features, just tall and solid black. My friend at the same time swiveled his desk chair and pointed towards the entryway where he saw the figure. The figure stepped back into the dark as quickly as it appeared, as though it didn't want him to see it. I looked at him and said, "Did you see that too?" To which he replied, "See what?" He was only being animated during the song, but for sure didn't see anything. I've experienced several things at this house. He has not though, and it upsets him. But what I experienced that evening was the most eerie and frightening thing for sure. I know it wasn't one of his friends, or someone goofing off. It isn't easy to walk into his house, through the front door, and not be heard. The floor is tile. We walked over and turned on the light, and we both looked. There was no one there. I just went home. I couldn't stay there, and I begged him to come with me, but he wouldn't. A few days later when we talked, I asked him if he had ever had any seances or similar things in the house. He had first said no because it was his grandma's house, and he moved in about a year after she had passed. But then he paused, and then he said, "Well, remember when we cleaned out the attic? There was a Ouija board up there." Well, no, I didn't remember, and I told him to get his house cleansed, but he was just laughing at me. I've never been back to his house since that night. About 2 weeks later, he got an unintentional EVP, which is very eerie also. He has a voice-activated recorder and was recording a couple of programs off the computer for a friend at work. He turned off the computer and the TV isn't hooked up anyways, but when he woke up, there were 3 recordings instead of 2 on the recorder. I know he's pretty up on computers, but he didn't make this EVP himself. Actually, it scared him, and he said he wasn't going to listen to it anymore. Even though I'm not sure whether I do in fact believe in ghosts and the supernatural, I must be the Ghost Stories world's biggest fan and relentless reader, and have been a patron of your site for many, many years, at least a decade now. Like I said, not being totally sure whether I do actually believe in ghosts, I've never had a story of my own contribute to a website. However, over the past months, possibly years, certain things have happened in our current rented home. Occurrences in this house that made me think twice, maybe even 3 times about what I actually do and don't believe in. My husband Craig and I have been living in our rented home here in Melbourne, Australia for almost 4 years now. We rent privately and know very little about the house and its history, apart from the fact that we are private renters and the rent has always been almost ridiculously cheap. The house isn't that old, however. It would only be about 15 or 20 years old. We do know, however, that several of the last tenants that lived here, families with children, by the look of the wall drawings in the study and backyard, moved out fairly quick after moving in, which has always puzzled me, as the house isn't in that bad a shape. The neighborhood is okay, and the rent, like I said, has always been ridiculously cheap. Any questionable incident that has happened in this house has either taken place in the lounge room or the nursery. My daughter is now 3 months short of turning 3. I remember one time when my daughter was tiny. She would have been 6 months old at the time. We'd put her to bed in her cot in her room. She's always been a fire alarm screamer, and on this particular day, after screaming for about 10 minutes, she quite suddenly stopped dead. Assuming that she had just fallen asleep, I walked outside into the backyard about 10 minutes later to feed the dog. I looked through her window subtly to make sure that all was calm in her room, when I noticed a very strange thing. My daughter did not look close to sleeping at all. She was in fact staring intently at the ceiling. I watched her eyes move from left to right and so forth, as if she was watching something very closely, but there was nothing there. Not thinking all that much of it, I went back inside and continued on with whatever I was doing, thinking that she was just boring herself off to sleep. A few weeks later, something very similar happened to this again, except this time, it was in the lounge room. Heidi was sitting with me on the couch. The family dog was also in the room, sitting by my feet, as Heidi all of a sudden started staring at the ceiling again, with much the same intensity as before in her room. This time, the dog joined in and was making much the same eye and head movements as Heidi was, as if they were both watching something on the ceiling move from side to side. The dog's hair then stood on the back of its neck, and he started growling, which frightened me, as he is one of the friendliest dogs in the world and wouldn't hurt a fly. Then, being a bit of a wimp, he got up and snuck into the next room and didn't come back for about a half an hour. This sort of thing has happened about 3 or 4 times since then, but nothing besides this has ever happened either. No apparitions or noises or banging. I've sometimes had the feeling, though, that we are not alone here. Nothing like this ever happens when my husband is at home, only when I am alone or with Heidi. A couple of days ago, it happened again. Heidi started off by staring at the ceiling, and then her gaze diverted to her toy basket in the corner of the room. She looked at me, smiled, looked back at the toy basket, pointed, and yelled, "Baby." The word baby doesn't necessarily mean baby to Heidi. She calls newborns babies, as well as toddlers up to about her own age. I asked her, "Where, Heidi? Where is the baby?" "There," she persisted. "There, baby." I shrugged and looked away again, and hoped to dear God that she would stop pointing and looking at that darn toy basket. She did, thankfully, after only about a minute or so this time. What do you honestly think about this? Fluke? Or something more than just imaginative child playfulness? This website has mentioned dark, powerful energies such as imps, and I noticed the creator of this website has seen what could be called imps. Imps are described as devil spirits, who are demons, and small in stature. I've had many experiences throughout my life like the one the web creator had growing up. I don't like talking about them so much, and do my best to keep it dormant, but I did read their story, and I've had an experience with a small black figure that sounds like one of the imps described in that story. Me, my daughter, and my wife all used to sleep in the same bed till our little girl was 1.5 years old. Around the time my daughter was that age, I remember staying up till close to 1 or 2 a.m. watching a long movie. When I was finished, I went to the room and turned on the bathroom light to brush my teeth. Our room was well lit from the bathroom. Since around the age of 3, I've had dealings with spirits as well. So, when I was about halfway through my brushing, I pretty much knew from that feeling I had that something was happening. I looked in the room where my daughter and wife were sleeping, and called from behind my daughter in a fetal position was a small black figure. It looked human, but it moved, behaved, and felt like it was something else. It looked towards me, got on all fours, and scurried across the bed lightning fast. I kinda jumped back, but it disappeared when it hit the floor. The strange thing was, after I got into bed, my daughter, eyes closed, still asleep, did the exact same thing the figure did before I went to bed. Only my daughter stopped with her still sleeping face right in mine, then laid back down, and was normal again. Some other things started happening after that, but I don't know if they're related. I hope my story helps you figure out what these things are. My story begins about 3 years ago. I was 27. And me and my husband were expecting our first child. We had been living with his mother, but since I had become pregnant, we needed a place of our own. My parents owned 2 houses, one in which they lived in, and the other right behind theirs. My oldest brother and wife and children used to live there, but he bought the house right next door to my parents. Always wanted to stay close to our family. We're very close. Now that the house behind my parents was unoccupied, my mother asked me to move in. My husband and I gladly accepted. We would have more room and a place of our own. Well, the very next day we moved in, I was about 41 weeks pregnant and needed to go to the hospital to be induced for labor. We had a healthy baby boy. After our stay in the hospital, we returned to our new home. About 4 to 6 weeks after we moved in, I started hearing a noise in the middle of the night, coming from the closet in our bedroom. My husband worked a graveyard shift most nights at the time, so I was alone at night with our son a lot. The noise was that of the closet door opening. I had put a long rectangular mirror on the closet door, those that are about 1 foot wide and 4 feet long. It had 2 hooks that went over the top of the door, so as to hang the mirror. So every time you opened it, it would screech very loudly, since the metal hooks rubbed against the door frame. Well, like I said, about 4 to 6 weeks after we moved in, I heard this very loud screech at about 2:30 to 3 a.m. I woke up and realized it was the closet door opening. It opened about 4 inches. We had 2 chinchillas that slept on the floor at the end of the bed, and I just rationalized it to one of them opening the door with their paw. But I know that would have to take some effort, since the metal hooks over the top of the door made it hard to open, and would make the door get stuck. I didn't really get scared. I just looked, then went back to sleep. About 2 weeks later, again, me asleep, alone, middle of the night. Then the screeching sound of the closet door opening. I woke up, and this time sat up and looked at the closet door. What just happened? I checked on my baby in his bassinet next to my bed, and he was fast asleep. I looked at the chinchillas. They were awakened too, and looking at the closet door, but had not moved. So again, I felt no fright and went back to sleep. Again, a few weeks later, my husband had a day off, so he was home that night. And again, about 2 or 3 a.m., the screeching noise of this closet door being pushed open from the inside. My husband wakes up and just stares at the door. Now he saw firsthand what I had told him about. The last time this happened was some weeks after that. Again, I was alone at night. I heard the screeching sound of the door opening, only it sounded like it opened a little bit wider than just 4 inches this time. I sat up and looked at the door. The chihuahuas were staring at the closet door as well. This time, they stood up. Then the closet door started opening a little bit further still. That set the chihuahuas off. One was barking at the closet door like there was no tomorrow, and the other ran under the bed crying and howling. Their reaction is what scared me the most. My heart was racing. I put my head under the covers. The closet door didn't open further, but it took me forever to get back to sleep. After that night, I was scared of the closet. I told my husband, and he put a lock on the door. I closed it and locked it every night. I didn't open it again. Only one thing happened after that. About a year later, the closet door became increasingly harder to close. It would get stuck, and I would really have to push to close it completely. One Sunday night, about 7:30 p.m. this time, I again was home alone. My husband was working, and my son was with my parents in the house in front of ours. I was watching some TV, and I didn't like to leave the closet door open anymore. So I walked over to the closet door to try and close it completely. I was really pushing, and I started banging on the door with my fist to try and close it. It was almost closed. Then, while I was banging with my fist, right on the other side of the door there was a loud bang, as if someone hit it with their fist. It was right on the spot I was hitting it. I could feel the vibration against me. I stepped away from the closet door. I tried to stay calm. I'll try to sit down and watch some TV, I told myself. I sat down, but could not keep my eyes off the closet door. After about 30 seconds, I decided I couldn't stay in the house any longer. I left my parents' house in front of mine and left the TV on. Why did that scare me so much? I was fine when the closet door would open in the middle of the night. Was it because I was so sleep deprived from having an infant son that it was so easy for me to go back to sleep? The fact that I heard the banging on either side of the closet unnerved me so much. Thinking back, I remembered when I was 14 and my brother first moved in the very same house with my then 4-month pregnant sister-in-law and her 4-month-old daughter from a previous marriage. I remember shortly after they moved in, her telling me she thought the house was haunted. I asked why, and she told me that at night, she would see the closet doorknob rattle and turn. Oh, it's just her imagination, I told her. Even at 14, I would rationalize everything. I guess it wasn't her imagination after all. I later asked my niece, now 21, if she ever saw anything. She told me she did, which I later write about. This is something completely different to my experience, and I think it had something to do with her, and not the house. She also used to tell me that the closet door used to open in front of my brother until he confronted it. Then it stopped. Thank you for taking the time to read my story. I live about 20 minutes from an old covered bridge in Mableton, Georgia. This is one of the places I've been to in the surrounding area and where I had the most happen. In 2004, we went on a last-minute hunt to the bridge. I know you're supposed to be better prepared, but I kept most of my things in the car at all times, just in case. We of course had heard the local legends and wanted to see for ourselves, so we headed down after about midnight. Even then, the traffic on the road was just heavy enough that we were unable to try the chocolate thing with the car, so we parked up the road a ways away at the Comet Trail parking lot. We walked down and took our flashlights with us. On either side of the bridge are orange streetlights, so the bridge is lit up all the way through. One in the group brought her cousin, and I didn't realize at first that he had been drinking, or he would have stayed behind. He got up in one of the bridge's windows and peed into the creek below. After yelling at him to stop, I realized I could no longer see the lights on either side of the bridge. Our flashlights also stopped working, all of them. After the temperature dropped and it became dark the way it did, I told others it was time to leave. We then saw the streetlights turn on for a second, and then in the distance, at the other end of the bridge, two kids dressed in formal attire, standing and hand-holding. Had to be about 30 seconds, but we saw it. We froze, then started back to the car. As we walked out of the bridge, we heard what sounded like little kids laughing, and they actually touched and poked at our backs as we hurried as fast as we could back up the hill. One of our group reported hearing a voice in his ear telling him to run. I have to say it was unsettling, and though I haven't been back to the bridge yet, it hasn't stopped me from going to other places. I've heard voices and gotten pics, and even had things happen at other sites. This one was one of the best ones, because I don't get physically touched by them often. I also believe nothing would have happened if he had not upset the spirits the way he did. I'm very much more careful about who I bring with now. Only one town over from our home stands one of the largest and most ornate railway stations in our state. The owners worked over 20 years bringing it back from neglect in a time gone by, as their second love is antiques. They have decorated it with period pieces throughout, now opened it as an outstanding restaurant. My husband and I often bring friends there to enjoy not only the wonderful food, but for the pleasure of watching them jump as the Amtrak fly by, only feet from the window. There is a very small organ that has been placed on a wall, not far from where we often sit. Several meals ago, our waitress entertained us by telling, some people have commented there is a ghost attached to this instrument. One said she saw a very small, frail old lady standing by it, saying, "This isn't right," indicating dismay as to how our organ came to be sitting in an eatery. The waitress went on to say, they never like to work alone when closing up, as there's so many unexplained noises. We enjoyed a meal there today, and as always, our conversation turned into the many thousands of people now gone that pass through these massive arched doors. Out of nowhere, I smelled a very strong odor of ivory soap. Mind you, we are eating fish, no one is passing by, and the other tables haven't changed their patrons. I say nothing, but a moment later, my husband smells it and says how weird it is. Such an uncommon smell today. It lasted for about 3 minutes. There was no explaining the smell. As we finish, we wander through the hall looking at various rail-related antiques and move on to the outside. There's an Amtrak train on the track, but it is going slow. Strange, as they usually are speeding enough for an onlooker to feel their wind as they pass, heading for Boston. It comes to a complete stop at the station. A man in uniform gets out and looks at the front and then under. Turning to us, he says he thought he saw someone laying on the track. He walks about, making a full inspection. Then he gets in, and then starts going. We see the riders in their seats. But as we watch, he stops again, just down the track, and repeats the inspection again. Strange day. This place should be investigated. This is my second entry and story. This takes place in Rusk, Texas in the 70s. This story comes from an acquaintance of mine, who is really more of a good friend of mine, of my good friends. Mike and Katie were married and had 2 children. One was a 9-year-old boy, and the other was a 5-year-old girl. They moved into a house that had a shotgun-style layout. In other words, you entered into the living room, and there was a straight hallway all the way to the back door, with all of the rooms off of this one main hallway. Mike and Katie took the first door on the right as their bedroom, while giving the children the last door on the left to their bedroom. One night, not long after the move, Mike and his wife were sound asleep when they were awakened by screams of Mommy and Daddy, and turned on the nightstand lamp to find both their children wide awake and terrified. The children claimed to have seen a man with a hat on and a beard peering into their window. Mike immediately got his gun and ran around the back, where he found an empty field and no sign of anyone having been there. At first, they were under the impression that this man had a ladder because the back of the house stood on a steep grade down, and no one could be peering into one of the back windows without a ladder. But the occurrence repeated itself, and finally, Mommy asked the kids to describe exactly what they had seen. Their stories were both told at different sessions and matched completely. What had woken the children was a strange light out the window and someone walking up and down on what sounded like wood boards. They said this man leaned over and looked down into the window, and he had a shotgun in his hands. The couple moved the children to another room, and Mike did some laborious digging into the history and county files in the house. Through newspapers and files, plus some additional info from some of the older townspeople, Mike learned that this house had once been at another location, and when it was moved, it was turned around so that what had been the front of the house was now the back of the house. He also learned that the man who had died at the house had been arrested and died in prison for shooting his wife and her lover in their bed with a shotgun. I've sent in one other story about my mother's house in Illinois, but I have 2 more stories to share. I was raised by my grandparents. Their house has its share of odd occurrences, knocking sounds from within the walls, an apparition of my great-grandmother, and eerie feelings down the long hallway to the bedrooms. One night, I was around 9 in 1989. I was lying in bed, trying to fall asleep. My bed was facing the doorway, and I could see into my grandparents' bedroom across the hall. The hall is only about 4 feet wide. The only light visible came from a small night light in the outlet at the center of the hall. As I was tossing and turning, trying to fall asleep, I looked out into the hallway and saw a young woman with curly hair, her body glowing faintly. She carried a candle in her cupped hands. She walked slowly and paused for a second and turned to look into my grandparents' room. Being the nervous child I was, I quickly pulled the covers over my head and ignored it, eventually falling asleep. Years passed, and I never saw another apparition. When I was 16, 1996, I was still living there. I grew up in that house, 13 years total, and had moved across the hall, having switched rooms with my grandparents. I decided I would try an experiment. I found a dress similar to the one I saw the apparition wearing, so I decided I would put it on and sort of relive that experience. I have very curly hair, and it was the same length as the apparitions. I put on the dress, grabbed a short white candle, turned off the hall light, lit the candle, and took the path that I had witnessed the apparition take. I took the same route, made the slow walk, paused at my old bedroom door, looked in, and walked into what was now my bedroom. Was what I saw a ghost, or merely a glimpse into my future? Was I seeing myself on some other intersecting point of time? I'm still trying to figure that one out. Next story. This occurred in 1997, while I was at a Native American ceremony in the woods in Nebraska. We had been out in the woods for about a week, living in our tents and teepees, ceremonies going on throughout that time. I'd heard the stories of spirits who lived in the trees, and being as curious as I am about the supernatural, I was nervous and excited to see what might be out there. For the first few days, things were normal, and I went about my business working in the cook shack, making large quantities of food for the huge number of people there. One evening, after dinner, I was sitting at a table with the aider, talking about the name he had just given me, Star Woman, for my love of looking at the stars for hours on end, when my right hand suddenly went ice cold. My mother was sitting to my left, and I said, "Wow, my hand just went freezing cold." There was no wind, and it was July in Nebraska, pretty hot, even after the sun went down. She said, "Oh, don't worry, that's just the spirit touching you." I can't recall the name for them, so I'll just say spirit. I think it was Wayne Guy, but I'm not sure. Okay, no big deal. Our tent was set up along the perimeter of the tree line, with an outhouse about 50 feet to the right. On several occasions, while walking to the outhouse, I noticed black human forms in the trees. When I'd shine my flashlight on them, they were gone. I attributed this to my imagination. A few days later, a friend who had brought along for the trip was sitting in my tent with me, talking about the day. I was on the left side, leaning back on my arms, with my lantern flashlight next to my left hand, about 12 inches away. It was the kind where you could pull up the body of the flashlight to reveal a lantern. We were talking, and we noticed the light shifting in the tent. There were no other lights, aside from a bonfire on the side of the camp at about 300 feet. I looked at my flashlight, and it was standing on its edge. All we could do was sit and watch it. It stood on its edge for about 2 minutes. Then we decided to leave the tent for a while, because we were a bit freaked out. The flashlight had a rounded head, not a square one. My hand did cause the tent floor to dent in slightly, but my flashlight was nowhere near my hand or the dent I made in the floor. The light was literally standing on one rounded edge. When I mentioned it to my mom the next day, she quipped, "They were playing with you. They must like you." I wasn't really scared, just a bit nervous, considering we were out in the wilderness with no lights. I was intrigued more than anything, considering the nature of the ceremony we were attending. I'm certain the spirits were focused by our activity. I hope to return to that spot in the future. This occurred in Miami, Florida in 1980 when I was 15. I still don't know if this was a paranormal experience, but it was unsettling nevertheless. I was babysitting for the next door neighbors one evening. Their daughter was down for bed, and I was in the family room watching TV. They had a small anchor biter type dog, and it went to the double sliding glass doors that led out into the rear patio and pool area, like it wanted to go to the bathroom. All of the homes in this area had a screened-in patio pool enclosure, and when you open the sliding glass door to step out into the patio, immediately to your left was a screen door that led into the backyard. Unlike most of the homes in my neighborhood though, the backyard was surrounded by a chain-link fence. So I go and open the sliding glass door, which was completely covered by drapes for privacy, to let the dog out. The dog steps out, and I immediately hear the crunching of grass in the yard to my left, as though someone is walking in the backyard. Startled, I look to my left, and there is what appears to be a man, adult size, reaching out as if to open the screen door. I immediately slammed the glass sliding door shut, scared out of my wits. I stood frozen in fear in the living room. Silence. After a few minutes, I cautiously peered through the curtain onto the patio. No one there, just a dog sniffing around. I let the dog in, and he did not appear agitated at the least. I never thought much about it after that, until years later. If there was someone there, why didn't the dog bark? If it was supernatural, animals are known to get agitated, yet nothing. My imagination? Definitely not. Nothing like that ever occurred again in subsequent babysitting for that neighbor. Hey, Phantom. So first of all, want to thank you guys so much for tuning into this compilation, and decided to give you guys the monthly compilation because I know you guys really needed some content. And let's face it, there are things going on in this world that we definitely don't want to be a part of, and unfortunately things are happening, and I just want to let you guys know that I'm so thankful to have this platform to actually talk to you guys and entertain you and give you guys a bit of a distraction from all the hecticness of the world right now. Anyway, guys, give this video a like, share, and subscribe.